The Eye of Terror stands as the galaxy's greatest wound, a permanent scar where reality itself has been torn asunder, and the Immaterium bleeds through into the material realm. This vast region of twisted space-time, stretching across thousands of light years, did not emerge through gradual corruption or the slow machinations of chaos. Instead, it was born in a single cataclysmic moment that shattered the barriers between dimensions and gave birth to the youngest and most terrible of the Chaos Gods. The origins of this cosmic catastrophe lie not with humanity or the forces of the Imperium, but with the ancient Eldar Empire at the height of its decadent glory. For millions of years, the Eldar had ruled the galaxy as its undisputed masters, their psychic prowess and technological mastery allowing them to shape entire star systems to their whims. Their empire encompassed countless worlds, connected by the labyrinthine passages of the webway, a network of tunnels through the warp that allowed instantaneous travel across vast distances without the dangers of direct warp exposure. By the 29th millennium, the Eldar had achieved a level of technological and psychic sophistication that rendered physical labor and material want obsolete. Their society had evolved beyond the need for struggle or hardship, creating a civilization where every desire could be fulfilled with minimal effort. This paradise, however, contained the seeds of its own destruction. Without challenge or purpose, the Eldar turned increasingly toward sensation and experience as the primary means of finding meaning in their extended lives. The Eldar psyche, naturally attuned to the warp and capable of experiencing emotions with an intensity that would destroy lesser beings, began to explore ever more extreme forms of pleasure and sensation. What began as artistic expression and philosophical exploration gradually transformed into something far more sinister. Entire sectors of Eldar society devoted themselves to the pursuit of increasingly exotic and extreme experiences, pushing the boundaries of sensation, pain, and pleasure in ways that would have horrified their ancestors. The core worlds of the Eldar Empire became centers of hedonistic excess that defied description. Vast pleasure palaces sprawled across entire continents, their twisted architecture designed to amplify and focus psychic energy. Within these structures, the Eldar engaged in rituals and practices that blurred the lines between ecstasy and agony, creation and destruction. Their psychic emanations, magnified by their natural abilities and the sheer number of participants, began to coalesce in the warp, feeding something that had never existed before. The barriers between real space and the Immaterium, maintained by the natural order of the universe, began to weaken under the constant psychic pressure generated by billions of Eldar minds focused on sensation and excess. The warp, that roiling sea of emotion and thought that underlies all reality, responded to this unprecedented influx of hedonistic psychic energy by beginning to form a new consciousness, a gestalt entity that would eventually become known as Slaanesh, she who thirsts. The process was gradual at first, taking place over several millennia, as the new entity slowly coalesced from the psychic emanations of the Eldar Empire. The barriers between dimensions grew progressively thinner, allowing increasing amounts of warp energy to seep into real space. This leakage manifested in subtle ways initially, reality becoming more malleable around the core worlds, time flowing differently in certain regions, and the laws of physics becoming increasingly unreliable. As the entity that would become Slaanesh grew stronger, feeding on the endless stream of sensation and excess generated by the Eldar, the effects became more pronounced. Entire worlds began to experience reality storms, where the fundamental nature of existence would shift without warning. Mountains might suddenly become liquid, gravity could reverse itself, and the very air might transform into something altogether different. The Eldar, intoxicated by their pursuits and blinded by their arrogance, failed to recognize these phenomena as harbingers of approaching doom. The final phase of this cosmic gestation began in the closing years of the 29th millennium and reached its horrific climax in the early 30th millennium. The psychic pressure generated by the Eldar Empire had reached a critical threshold, and the barriers between dimensions could no longer contain the growing entity within the warp. The birth of Slaanesh was not a gentle emergence, but a violent rupture that tore through the fabric of reality itself. The moment of birth occurred simultaneously across across the entire core region of the Eldar Empire, as the new Chaos God's first breath drew in the souls of virtually every Eldar within thousands of light years. The psychic death screams of billions of beings, each possessing psychic abilities far beyond those of ordinary mortals, created a resonance cascade that shattered the barriers between dimensions permanently. The agony and ecstasy of their final moments, amplified by their psychic nature, fed directly into Slaanesh's birth, making the new god immeasurably powerful from the very instant of its existence. The physical effects of this catastrophic birth were immediate and devastating. Across hundreds of star systems, reality simply ceased to function according to its normal laws. Planets were turned inside out, their molten cores becoming their surfaces while their atmospheres sank to the center. Stars aged millennia in moments, some collapsing into black holes while others expanded into red giants that consumed their entire systems. Space itself became fluid, flowing like water and carrying entire worlds along currents of pure warp energy. The region that had once been the heart of the Eldar Empire transformed into something that defied conventional description. The normal three-dimensional space that defined real space became intermingled with the chaotic geometry of the warp, creating a realm where the laws of physics were merely suggestions, and the landscape could shift according to the whims of chaos entities. Mountains of crystallized screams rose from seas of liquid emotion, while forests of bone and sinew grew beneath skies that rained tears of molten gold. This transformation was not merely physical but metaphysical, affecting the very nature of existence within the affected region. Time became non-linear, with past, present, and future existing simultaneously in some areas, while being completely absent in others. Causality broke down, allowing effects to precede their causes and creating paradoxes that would drive mortal minds to madness. The boundary between thought and reality dissolved, meaning that the mere act of imagination could reshape the environment around the observer. The newborn realm pulsed with malevolent life, its landscape constantly shifting and reforming according to the desires and nightmares of its demonic inhabitants. Vast cities of living flesh sprouted from the ground, their walls breathing and their streets flowing with rivers of psychic energy. Palaces of impossible beauty rose and fell in moments, their architecture defying geometric logic while somehow remaining perfectly functional for their otherworldly inhabitants. Within this twisted realm, the demons of Slaanesh found their perfect playground. Keepers of secrets stalked through halls of mirrors that reflected not images but desires, while demonettes danced through gardens where the flowers screamed in harmony with their movements. The very air thrummed with psychic energy, so intense that it could drive mortals insane with a single breath, yet it provided perfect sustenance for the entities of chaos that now called this place home. The Eldar who had not been consumed in the initial cataclysm found themselves facing extinction on a scale that their race had never before experienced. Those who survived the birth of Slaanesh did so only by being far from the core worlds when the catastrophe struck, or by possessing some form of protection against the psychic tsunami that accompanied the new god's emergence. The survivors faced a terrible reality. Their empire was gone, their gods were dead or dying, and their very souls were now claimed by the entity they had inadvertently created. The immediate aftermath saw a desperate exodus as surviving Eldar populations fled to whatever refuges they could find. The massive craft worlds, originally designed as trading vessels and mobile cities, became arcs of salvation for those who could reach them. These vast constructs, some the size of small moons, engaged their ancient drives and fled into the void, carrying millions of survivors away from the expanding zone of corruption. Other Eldar sought refuge in the hidden city of Camorra, deep within the webway itself. This ancient metropolis, originally built as a port and meeting place for the various factions of the Eldar Empire, became a sanctuary for those willing to embrace darker methods of survival. The inhabitants of Camorra, who would eventually become known as the Dark Eldar or Drukhari, discovered that by inflicting pain and suffering on others, they could sustain their souls and prevent them from being consumed by Slaanesh. The Exodite worlds, settled by Eldar who had rejected the decadent path of the core worlds millennia earlier, found themselves vindicated in their decision to abandon the Empire's hedonistic culture. These worlds, located far from the Eye of Terror, became havens for survivors who sought to return to a simpler way of life. The Exodites had maintained their connection to nature and rejected the psychic excess that had doomed their kin, allowing them to weather the psychic storm that accompanied Slaanesh's birth. The creation of the Eye of Terror marked more than just the destruction of the Eldar Empire. It represented a fundamental shift in the balance of power within the galaxy. The largest warp storm in known space now existed as a permanent gateway between the Immaterium and realspace, allowing the forces of chaos unprecedented access to the material universe. Demon armies could march directly from the warp into reality without the need for complex summoning rituals or temporary breaches in the barriers between dimensions. The Eye's influence extended far beyond its visible boundaries, affecting space-time throughout the surrounding sectors. Navigation became treacherous as the warp storms radiating from the Eye interfered with conventional travel methods. Entire systems found themselves cut off from the rest of the galaxy as the chaotic energies made warp travel impossible or deadly. The region became a no-man's land where only the most desperate or foolhardy would venture. The psychic resonance of the Eye could be felt across the galaxy, its malevolent presence detectable by any being with even rudimentary psychic abilities. Psykers throughout the galaxy reported nightmares and visions of impossible beauty and terrible corruption, while sensitive individuals found themselves drawn toward the Eye's location despite having no knowledge of its existence. The birth of Slaanesh had created a psychic beacon that would attract the attention of chaos cultists and fallen souls for millennia to come. The weakening of the barriers between dimensions that had enabled the Eye's creation continued to have effects throughout the galaxy. Reality became less stable in regions with high concentrations of psychic activity, allowing smaller warp storms and demonic incursions to occur with increasing frequency. The galaxy had become a more dangerous place, where the very fabric of existence could be torn apart by sufficient psychic trauma or chaos worship. The Eye of Terror exists as a cosmic anomaly that defies conventional understanding of space and scale. Stretching approximately 20,000 light-years across at its widest point, this vast region encompasses hundreds of star systems that have been fundamentally altered by their exposure to the raw energies of chaos. To comprehend the true magnitude of this aberration, one must consider that the Eye spans a distance roughly equivalent to 1/5 of the Milky Way's diameter, making it visible from virtually anywhere in the galaxy as a malevolent red stain against the stars. Within this immense region, the normal structure of space-time has been completely subverted. What was once a collection of orderly solar systems, each following predictable orbital mechanics and governed by consistent physical laws, has become a patchwork of reality fragments stitched together by the whims of chaos entities. Star systems that once required decades of warp travel to traverse now exist in impossible proximity to one another, their gravitational fields intermingling in ways that should tear both apart but instead create stable, if utterly alien, configurations. The boundaries of the Eye are not fixed or clearly defined like the borders of an imperial sector. Instead, they fluctuate constantly, expanding and contracting according to the psychic tides that flow through the region. During periods of intense chaos activity, the Eye's influence can extend thousands of light-years beyond its normal limits, engulfing previously stable systems in waves of corruption. Conversely, when the Chaos God's attention turns elsewhere, some border regions may experience temporary respites where normal physics reassert themselves, though these moments of stability rarely last long enough for meaningful imperial reclamation efforts. The stellar phenomena within the Eye present a catalog of impossibilities that would challenge the sanity of any imperial astrophysicist. Binary star systems orbit around points of absolute darkness where light itself is consumed, while other regions contain stars that burn with flames of pure psychic energy, their radiation capable of mutating any living creature exposed to it across interplanetary distances. Some systems feature multiple suns that exist in the same orbital position simultaneously, each representing a different aspect of chaos and casting light that reveals different versions of the same planets depending on the observer's state of mind. Planetary bodies within the Eye have undergone transformations that render them unrecognizable from their original forms. Worlds that once supported thriving Eldar populations now exist as living entities, their surfaces pulsing with organic rhythms, while their atmospheres consist of crystallized emotions. Gas giants have been turned inside out, their cores exposed to space, while their former atmospheres compress into solid shells that ring the planets like impossible mountains. Rocky worlds float freely through space without stars to anchor them, their surfaces lit by auroras of pure warp energy that dance across skies filled with impossible colors. The phenomenon of temporal distortion within the eye represents perhaps its most insidious characteristic. Time flows differently throughout the region, not merely at an accelerated or decelerated rate, but in fundamentally alien patterns that can drive mortal minds to madness. In some areas, millennia pass in the span of heartbeats, causing any unprotected organic matter to age and decay instantaneously. These temporal acceleration zones appear as shimmering distortions in space, visible to the naked eye, as regions where light itself seems to age and fade before reaching the observer. Conversely, other regions experience temporal deceleration, so severe that individual moments stretch into subjective eternities. Warriors who enter these zones may experience every second of a battle as lasting hours or days, feeling each heartbeat as a thunderous drumroll that echoes across subjective eons. The psychological trauma inflicted by such experiences often proves more devastating than any physical wound, as the human mind simply cannot process the concept of infinite duration compressed into finite moments. More disturbing still are the regions where time flows in reverse or sideways, creating paradoxes that violate the fundamental principles of causality. In these areas, effects precede their causes, allowing observers to witness the consequences of actions they have not yet taken. Ammunition expended in firefights returns to weapons before the triggers are pulled, while wounds heal before the weapons that will inflict them are drawn. Imperial forces venturing into such regions often report the deeply unsettling experience of remembering events that have not yet occurred while forgetting actions they have just completed. The non-linear nature of time within the eye creates navigation hazards that extend far beyond simple temporal displacement. Imperial vessels attempting to traverse the region may emerge from the warp to find themselves arriving at their destination before they departed, or discover that their target system has aged millions of years during a journey that subjectively lasted only days. Astropathic communications become unreliable or impossible, as messages sent through the warp may arrive decades before they are transmitted or become lost in temporal loops that repeat them endlessly throughout the region. These temporal anomalies interact with the eye's spatial distortions to create regions where the normal relationship between distance and time completely breaks down. A journey of a few light years may require subjective centuries to complete, while crossing the entire breadth of the eye might take only moments if the traveler happens to follow the right currents of distorted space-time. Imperial tacticians have long since abandoned any attempt to create reliable maps of the region, as the very concept of fixed positions becomes meaningless when space itself can fold, twist, and invert without warning. The presence of demon worlds within the eye represents the ultimate expression of chaos dominion over reality. These planets have been completely reshaped by the will of the chaos gods, transformed into physical manifestations of their particular obsessions and desires. Each demon world serves as a stronghold and playground for its patron deity, a realm where the normal laws of physics have been replaced by the whims of entities whose very existence defies rational comprehension. Demon worlds dedicated to Khorne present landscapes of endless warfare and bloodshed, where the very ground consists of compacted bone and dried blood from countless battles. The skies rain brass and iron, while rivers of molten metal flow through valleys carved by the passage of titanic war machines. Mountains of skulls rise from plains of rusted weapons, their peaks crowned with fortresses built from the bones of fallen champions. The air itself carries the metallic taste of blood and the acrid smoke of burning cities, while the constant sound of battle echoes across every horizon. The gravitational fields of these worlds often exceed what should be physically possible, creating crushing environments where only the strongest can survive. Yet this extreme gravity serves a purpose beyond mere brutality, as it forces constant struggle and conflict among the world's inhabitants. Demons of Khorne engage in eternal combat across these hellish landscapes, their battles serving to generate the psychic energy that sustains their patron god, while providing entertainment for entities that view violence as the highest form of art. Worlds claimed by Nurgle present a different but equally horrifying transformation, becoming vast laboratories where disease and decay are elevated to divine status. These planets teem with impossible forms of life, organisms that thrive on corruption and feed on entropy itself. Forests of diseased trees grow fruit that contains every plague known to the galaxy, while swamps of putrid water nurture creatures that exist in states of constant decay and regeneration. The very air carries spores and viruses that can infect not just biological organisms, but mechanical devices and even abstract concepts like hope and courage. The cities on Nurgle's demon worlds resemble vast hospitals or laboratories, their architecture incorporating living tissue that pulses with infected blood vessels and nerve clusters. Streets flow with rivers of pus and bile, while buildings grow like tumors from the diseased ground beneath them. The inhabitants of these worlds exist in states of perpetual sickness, their bodies hosting countless diseases that somehow allow them to continue functioning despite conditions that should prove immediately fatal. Tzeentch's demon worlds embody change and mutation taken to impossible extremes, where the very concept of stability becomes anathema. The landscapes of these worlds shift constantly, with mountains becoming valleys, deserts transforming into oceans, and forests growing into crystalline structures before dissolving into pure energy. The architecture defies geometric logic, featuring buildings with more interior space than their exterior dimensions should allow, staircases that lead to rooms located beneath their starting points, and doorways that open onto entirely different worlds depending on the observer's intentions. Magic permeates every aspect of these worlds, with the laws of physics serving merely as suggestions that can be overruled by sufficient will or knowledge. The inhabitants engage in constant experimentation and transformation, their bodies shifting between forms as their minds explore new possibilities. Libraries containing infinite books exist alongside laboratories where the fundamental constants of reality are treated as variables to be adjusted at will. Slaanesh's demon worlds represent the pursuit of sensation and perfection carried to ultimate extremes, creating realms where beauty and horror intertwine in ways that can drive observers mad with desire or revulsion. The landscapes feature impossible vistas of crystalline perfection, where every surface reflects light in patterns designed to induce specific emotional responses. Gardens of living sculptures writhe in eternal dance, their forms shifting between states of divine beauty and grotesque corruption according to the observer's deepest desires and fears. The cities on these worlds resemble vast amphitheaters or pleasure palaces, their architecture designed to amplify and focus psychic energy while providing venues for performances that blend art, torture, and transcendence into singular experiences. Every surface, every angle, every proportion has been calculated to produce maximum aesthetic impact, creating environments so beautiful that mortals exposed to them often lose the will to leave or even move, becoming living statues frozen in moments of perfect rapture. The phenomenon of warp storms emanating from the eye creates navigation hazards that extend far beyond the region's visible boundaries. These storms represent areas where the barrier between real space and the Immaterium has become so thin that the chaotic energies of the warp bleed through into normal space-time. The storms appear as vast clouds of psychic energy that can span entire star systems, their boundaries marked by aurora, like displays of impossible colors that shift and dance according to the emotional states of nearby observers. Within these storms, conventional travel becomes extremely dangerous as the normal rules governing warp navigation break down completely. Ships entering storm regions may find their Geller fields overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of psychic energy, leaving their crews exposed to demonic possession or worse. Navigation becomes impossible as the storms interfere with both conventional sensors and psychic detection methods, leaving vessels to drift helplessly through regions where space itself has become fluid and unpredictable. The storms also create communication blackouts that can isolate entire Imperial sectors from contact with the wider galaxy. Astropathic messages attempting to pass through storm regions become garbled or transformed into incomprehensible visions that drive receiving psychers insane. Long-range communication networks that depend on psychic relay stations find their signals scattered or absorbed by the chaotic energies, creating information dead zones that can persist for decades or centuries. These communication disruptions have profound strategic implications for Imperial forces operating near the Eye. Military commanders find themselves unable to coordinate with distant units or receive orders from higher authority, forcing them to operate with unprecedented autonomy. Supply lines become unreliable as transport vessels struggle to navigate the shifting maze of warp storms, while reinforcement fleets may arrive months or years late due to temporal distortions encountered during their journeys. The storms themselves are not static phenomena, but pulse and flow according to patterns that seem to reflect the activities of the Chaos Gods within the Eye. During periods of intense demonic activity, the storms expand outward like the ripples from a stone dropped in still water, engulfing previously stable systems in waves of corruption. Conversely, when the attention of chaos turns elsewhere, some storms may dissipate temporarily, allowing brief windows of opportunity for Imperial forces to establish supply routes or evacuate threatened populations. The interior of the Eye of Terror exists as a patchwork of distinct realms, each shaped by the will and nature of the four primary Chaos Gods. These domains do not follow conventional geographic boundaries, but instead exist as overlapping territories, where the fundamental nature of reality shifts according to the patron deity's particular obsessions. The transitions between these realms occur without warning, as a traveler might step from a crystalline maze dedicated to Tzeentch directly into a plague garden of Nurgle, with no intervening neutral space to mark the boundary. The domain of Khorne manifests as an endless expanse of brass and blood, where the very concept of peace has been purged from existence. Vast fortresses of tarnished brass rise from plains carpeted with the bones of countless warriors, their walls constructed from interlocking skulls that still bear the expressions of rage they wore in their final moments. These citadels stretch impossibly high into skies the color of dried blood, their spires crowned with enormous brass skulls that serve as both architectural elements and monuments to the blood god's eternal hunger for violence. The fortresses themselves defy conventional military architecture, built not for defense, but to facilitate the maximum amount of bloodshed. Walls feature gaps and breaches that appear to be structural weaknesses, but actually serve as killing grounds, where defenders can engage attackers in close combat. Towers lack arrow slits or firing positions, instead offering only melee weapons mounted on swiveling brackets that require warriors to expose themselves completely to use them. The interior courtyards are designed as arenas where the fortress's inhabitants engage in constant combat, their battles generating the psychic energy that sustains the structure itself. Rivers of actual blood flow through these domains, their crimson waters carrying the dissolved remains of warriors from battles fought across the galaxy. These waterways range from narrow streams that bubble with the blood of single combats to vast torrents that could accommodate entire fleets, their surfaces reflecting not the brass sky above, but visions of ongoing conflicts throughout the material universe. The blood maintains its liquid state despite the extreme temperatures that should cause it to coagulate or evaporate, sustained by the psychic energy generated by the endless violence that feeds these streams. The banks of these blood rivers are lined with weapon trees, grotesque growths that sprout chainswords, axes, and other implements of war from their bark-like surfaces. These weapons are not decorative but fully functional armaments that regenerate when harvested, providing an endless supply of tools for the eternal battles that rage across Khorne's domain. The trees themselves are rooted in soil composed entirely of ground bone and dried blood, their nutrients drawn from the remains of warriors who have fallen in service to the blood god. Between the fortresses stretch battlefields that have no beginning and no end, where demon legions clash in conflicts that have raged for millennia without resolution. These are not chaotic melees, but organized warfare conducted on a scale that dwarfs the greatest battles of the material universe. Formations of bloodletters advance in perfect ranks across plains of skull fragments, their brass weapons gleaming as they march toward enemies that mirror their own disciplined fury. The sound of their approach creates a rhythmic thunder that can be heard across entire continents, a drumbeat of war that serves as the heartbeat of Khorne's realm. The combatants in these eternal battles include not only demons, but the souls of warriors who died in service to Khorne throughout the galaxy's history. These spirit warriors retain their skills and memories from life, but find their bodies transformed into idealized versions of their mortal forms, enhanced for endless combat, but stripped of any capacity for mercy or retreat. They fight with weapons forged from their own crystallized rage, implements that grow sharper and more deadly with each enemy they claim. Above these battlefields, the brass sky occasionally opens to reveal glimpses of conflicts raging on distant worlds, allowing the demons below to witness and draw inspiration from mortal warriors who serve their patron. These visions serve both as entertainment and as recruitment opportunities, as particularly impressive displays of martial prowess can attract the attention of demon princes who may choose to elevate worthy mortals to join their eternal armies. The temperature within Khorne's domain fluctuates wildly, from the searing heat generated by the brass fortresses to the bone-chilling cold that emanates from ancient battlefields where the psychic resonance of mass death has frozen the very air. These temperature variations create constant thermal winds that carry the scent of blood and the sound of distant combat across vast distances, ensuring that no corner of the domain remains untouched by the presence of war. In stark contrast to Khorne's straightforward brutality, Tzeentch's territories within the present labyrinthine realms where reality itself becomes a puzzle to be solved. These domains take the form of vast crystalline mazes that extend in all directions, including dimensions that mortal minds cannot properly perceive. The walls of these mazes are constructed from a substance that resembles crystal, but possesses properties that change according to the observer's knowledge and intentions. To an ignorant viewer, the walls might appear as simple barriers, but to one versed in the arcane arts, they reveal themselves as repositories of forbidden knowledge, inscribed in languages that shift and evolve as they are read. The geometry of Tzeentch's mazes defies conventional mathematics, featuring corridors that loop back on themselves while somehow leading to entirely different destinations, staircases that ascend and descend simultaneously, and chambers that exist in multiple locations at once. The pathways constantly reconfigure themselves according to patterns that reflect the changer of Wei's incomprehensible schemes, ensuring that no route through the maze remains stable for more than a few moments. Within these crystalline passages, knowledge takes on physical form, manifesting as living entities that skitter along the walls or float through the air like luminous butterflies. These knowledge creatures represent fragments of understanding torn from the minds of scholars, psychers, and sorcerers throughout the galaxy. They range from simple mathematical concepts that appear as geometric shapes to complex philosophical treatises that manifest as writhing, tentacled beings whose very presence can drive observers mad with unwanted enlightenment. The pursuit of these knowledge entities forms one of the primary activities within Tzeentch's domain, as demons and mortal servants engage in elaborate hunts designed to capture specific pieces of information. However, the act of capturing knowledge often proves more dangerous than beneficial, as the information may be incomplete, deliberately misleading, or so fundamentally alien that it corrupts the mind of anyone who attempts to comprehend it. Many of the maze's inhabitants exist in states of constant transformation, their bodies and minds reshaped by the forbidden knowledge they have absorbed. The walls of the maze serve as more than mere barriers, functioning as vast libraries where every secret ever conceived is recorded in scripts that write themselves. These inscriptions appear and disappear according to the reader's level of understanding and the changer of Wei's current whims. A scholar might spend subjective centuries studying a single wall only to discover that the knowledge they sought was always present, but written in a language they had not yet learned to perceive. At the center of certain maze sections stand towers of pure crystal that stretch infinitely upward, their surfaces reflecting not the viewer's image, but their potential futures. These towers serve as observation posts for Tzeentch's greater demons, who use them to monitor the countless schemes and plots unfolding throughout the galaxy. The reflections in the crystal show not just what might happen, but what could happen if specific variables were altered, providing the Chaos God with the information needed to manipulate events across space and time. The lighting within Tzeentch's domain comes not from any conventional source, but from the knowledge itself, as understanding literally illuminates the crystalline structures. Areas containing simple, easily grasped concepts glow with steady, gentle light, while regions housing complex or dangerous knowledge pulse with brilliant, chaotic radiance that can blind or enlighten observers depending on their preparedness to receive such illumination. Nurgle's territories within the eye present a grotesque parody of natural beauty, where the concepts of growth and decay have been merged into a single, horrifying whole. These regions resemble vast gardens that stretch beyond the horizon, their landscapes dominated by vegetation that exists in states of perpetual rot and regeneration. Trees grow to enormous sizes before collapsing under the weight of their own decay, only to immediately sprout new growth from their putrid remains. The cycle of death and rebirth occurs continuously, creating an ecosystem where nothing ever truly dies, but nothing remains unchanged for more than a few moments. The garden paths wind through groves of diseased trees whose fruits contain concentrated essences of every plague known to the galaxy. These fruits hang heavy on branches that droop with the weight of corruption, their surfaces glistening with moisture that carries viral and bacterial agents capable of infecting not just biological organisms, but mechanical devices and even abstract concepts. The very act of observing these fruits can transmit their diseases to the viewer, as Nurgle's plagues operate according to principles that transcend mere biological infection. Flowers bloom throughout these gardens in impossible profusion, their petals displaying colors that exist only in states of decay. These blossoms release spores that drift on winds that smell simultaneously of fresh growth and putrid death, carrying genetic material that can spontaneously generate new forms of life in whatever soil it settles upon. The resulting organisms often display characteristics borrowed from multiple species, creating hybrid creatures that embody Nurgle's philosophy of endless change through corruption. The waterways that flow through Nurgle's domain consist not of clear streams, but of thick, viscous fluids that contain the dissolved essence of countless organic compounds. These rivers of putrefaction support ecosystems of bacteria and fungi that have evolved beyond the need for conventional nutrients, instead feeding directly on entropy and decay. The banks of these waterways are lined with reeds and grasses that grow from soil composed entirely of composted organic matter, their roots extending deep into substrates that teem with microscopic life. Throughout the garden stand structures that resemble massive compost heaps or termite mounds, their surfaces crawling with insects and other decomposer organisms that serve as Nurgle's gardeners. These structures house the plague god's demon servants, who tend the gardens with the same care that mortal gardeners might show to prize roses. The demons carefully cultivate new strains of disease, crossbreeding different pathogens to create hybrid plagues that combine the most virulent characteristics of their parent organisms. The atmosphere within Nurgle's domain carries a thick, humid quality that makes every breath feel substantial, as if the air itself possesses nutritional value. This atmosphere supports airborne ecosystems of floating microorganisms that form visible clouds of living matter, their movements creating patterns that spell out the names of diseases in languages that predate mortal civilization. The temperature remains constant at the optimal level for bacterial growth, creating greenhouse conditions that accelerate the processes of decay and regeneration. Slaanesh's territories within the eye manifest as realms of impossible beauty and terrible excess, where the pursuit of perfection has been taken to extremes that transcend mortal comprehension. These domains feature landscapes that appear to have been crafted by artists with unlimited time and resources, every vista composed according to principles of aesthetic perfection that can overwhelm observers with their sheer beauty. Mountains rise in curves that follow mathematical equations describing ideal proportions, while valleys flow in patterns that mirror the most beautiful music ever composed. The architecture within Slaanesh's realm consists of palaces that dwarf the greatest imperial cathedrals, their structures built from materials that exist nowhere else in the universe. Walls constructed from crystallized ecstasy reflect light in patterns that induce specific emotional responses, while floors of polished obsidian show reflections that reveal the observer's deepest desires rather than their physical appearance. The buildings themselves seem to breathe with a subtle rhythm that matches the heartbeat of anyone who enters them, creating an intimate connection between structure and occupant. The interior spaces of these palaces defy conventional architectural logic, featuring rooms that expand or contract according to the emotional state of their occupants. Chambers designed for intimate gatherings can suddenly become vast amphitheaters when their inhabitants experience moments of transcendent joy, while grand ballrooms may shrink to closet-like proportions when their occupants seek privacy or contemplation. The walls display living murals that depict scenes of beauty and horror intermingled, their images shifting to reflect the psychological state of viewers. Gardens within Slaanesh's domain feature plants that have been bred not for practical purposes, but for pure aesthetic impact. Flowers bloom in colors that have no names in mortal languages, their petals arranged in patterns that follow mathematical principles of beauty, so perfect that they can induce states of religious ecstasy in observers. Trees grow in spirals that mirror the golden ratio, their branches supporting fruits that taste of pure pleasure, but leave consumers forever unsatisfied with any lesser sensation. The inhabitants of these palaces engage in pursuits that blend art, philosophy, and sensation into experiences that transcend the limitations of mortal perception. Musicians perform compositions that incorporate sounds beyond the range of normal hearing, while painters work with pigments that affect the observer's emotions directly rather than merely through visual impact. Sculptors create works from living tissue that continues to evolve and change, ensuring that no piece ever appears the same way twice. The lighting throughout Slaanesh's domain comes from sources that seem to understand the psychological impact of illumination, automatically adjusting their intensity and color to create the most aesthetically pleasing environment for whatever activities are taking place. Shadows fall in patterns that enhance rather than obscure the beauty of their surroundings, while highlights emphasize details that might otherwise go unnoticed. The very air shimmers with an opalescent quality that makes everything appear slightly more beautiful than it actually is, creating an environment where reality itself has been enhanced for maximum aesthetic impact. The final assault on the Imperial Palace had failed. As the walls of Terra burned and the Emperor lay broken upon the Golden Throne, Horus Lupercal's grand vision of galactic conquest crumbled into ash and bitter defeat. The Warmaster's death at his father's hands marked not just the end of the Horus heresy, but the beginning of a new chapter of horror for the galaxy. The surviving Traitor Legions, their dreams of victory shattered and their forces decimated by years of brutal warfare, faced the terrible reality of Imperial retribution. With the Loyalist forces regrouping and the full weight of the Imperium's wrath turning toward them, the traitors had only one option for survival: retreat into the howling madness of the Eye of Terror. The exodus began even before Horus's corpse had cooled aboard his flagship. Abaddon, the former first captain of the Luna Wolves, seized control of the remaining sons of Horus forces and ordered an immediate withdrawal from the Sol system. The decision came not from cowardice but from cold tactical necessity. The traitor fleets had suffered catastrophic losses during the siege, their numbers reduced to a fraction of their original strength. The surviving vessels limped away from Terra's orbit, their hulls scarred by weapon impacts, and their crews demoralized by the loss of their beloved Warmaster. The other traitor legions found themselves in similarly desperate circumstances. The World Eaters, their ranks depleted by countless berserker charges against the palace walls, gathered around their Primarch Angron as he raged against the defeat. The Iron Warriors, masters of siege warfare who had seen their greatest fortifications crumble before Imperial counterattacks, methodically organized their retreat under Perdurabo's bitter leadership. The Night Lords, their terror tactics proven insufficient against the defenders' resolve, melted away into the void like shadows fleeing the dawn. The Death Guard, ravaged by the plagues that had consumed their bodies during their service to Nurgle, shambled aboard their corrupted vessels with the mechanical precision that had once made them the most reliable of the Emperor's warriors. The Emperor's children, their pursuit of perfection twisted into horrific excess, retreated with an almost casual indifference to their defeat, as if the entire siege had been merely another aesthetic experience to be savored. The Thousand Sons, what remained of them after the flesh change had claimed so many of their number, followed their Cyclops Primarch Magnus into exile with the bitter knowledge that their warnings about chaos had been proven tragically correct. The Word-bearers, the architects of the heresy, whose religious fervor had started the galaxy down this path of damnation, withdrew with Lorgar's sermons still echoing in their Vox channels. They spoke of divine will and greater purposes, framing their defeat as merely another step in the Dark God's incomprehensible plans. The Alpha Legion, true to their nature, seemed to vanish entirely, their withdrawal so perfectly executed that Imperial forces could never determine exactly when or how they had departed. The journey to the Eye of Terror proved almost as costly as the siege itself. Imperial pursuit fleets harried the retreating traitors across dozens of star systems, forcing running battles that further depleted the already weakened Chaos forces. The Space Wolves, their fury at the betrayal of their brother legions burning bright, led many of these pursuit actions with a savagery that matched anything the World Eaters could produce. The Dark Angels, desperate to redeem themselves after the suspicious absence of their Primarch during the siege, threw themselves into the pursuit with an intensity that bordered on fanaticism. The traitor fleets found themselves scattered across the galaxy as they fled toward their chosen refuge. Some took direct routes through the warp, risking demon incursions and temporal anomalies in their haste to escape Imperial justice. Others attempted more circuitous paths, hoping to avoid detection, but often finding themselves cut off by loyalist forces that had anticipated their movements. The fractured nature of their retreat meant that many individual warbands became separated from their parent legions, beginning a process of fragmentation that would define Chaos' space marine organization for millennia to come. As the first traitor vessels crossed the threshold into the Eye of Terror, they encountered a realm that had been fundamentally transformed since the birth of Slaanesh. The chaotic energies unleashed by the Eldar Empire's fall had been further destabilized by the massive psychic trauma of the heresy itself. The deaths of billions of loyal Imperial citizens, the corruption of entire Space Marine legions, and the near destruction of the Emperor had sent shockwaves through the warp that resonated throughout the Eye's twisted geography. The Chaos Gods welcomed their new servants with gifts that were also curses. The raw stuff of the warp began to seep into the traitors' bodies and souls, accelerating mutations that had already begun during their service to the Dark Powers. Space Marines who had once been paragons of human genetic engineering found their flesh reshaping itself according to the whims of entities that viewed physical form as merely another medium for artistic expression. The Sons of Horus, renamed the Black Legion in bitter acknowledgement of their failure, experienced transformations that reflected their patron's nature as the Warmaster of Chaos. Their power armor fused with their flesh, creating hybrid forms that were part machine, part demon. Their weapons began to exhibit malevolent intelligence, whispering tactical advice that came with a price in sanity and soul. Abaddon himself underwent changes that elevated him beyond his original nature as a space marine, his body becoming a vessel for the combined will of all four Chaos Gods. The World Eaters found their berserker rage amplified beyond all previous limits as Khorne's influence saturated their beings. The psycho-surgical implants that had once regulated their aggression became obsolete as demonic possession provided a more direct path to eternal fury. Their chain axes grew teeth that regenerated from the wielder's own bone marrow, while their armor sprouted spikes that fed on the blood of enemies. Many World Eaters found their bodies swelling with unnatural muscle mass as Khorne reshaped them into more efficient killing machines. The Emperor's children embraced their transformation with the same enthusiasm they had once shown for martial perfection. Slaanesh's gifts manifested as enhanced senses that could perceive beauty and horror in ways that would drive normal humans insane. Their armor became living art, its surfaces shifting to display patterns that reflected the wearer's emotional state. Their weapons evolved into instruments of exquisite torture, designed not just to kill, but to extract the maximum possible sensation from both victim and wielder. The Death Guard discovered that their service to Nurgle had made them functionally immortal, but at a cost that would have horrified their former selves. Their bodies became walking ecosystems, hosting countless diseases and parasites that somehow allowed them to continue functioning despite conditions that should have been immediately fatal. Their armor rusted and corroded, but never failed completely, becoming part of their flesh in a symbiosis that blurred the line between machine and organism. The establishment of fortress worlds within the Eye began almost immediately as the Traitor Legions sought to create bases from which they could plan their eventual return to the material universe. These worlds, claimed from the Eye's chaotic geography through a combination of force and negotiation with demonic entities, became laboratories for the development of new forms of warfare and corruption. The process of claiming a world within the Eye required more than simple conquest. The planets themselves were often sentient entities that had to be bargained with, threatened, or somehow convinced to accept new inhabitants. Some worlds demanded tribute in the form of souls or emotions, while others required their new occupants to participate in elaborate rituals that bound them to the planet's essence. The most successful fortress worlds were those where the claiming legion's nature aligned with the world's existing characteristics, creating symbiotic relationships that benefited both parties. Medrengard, claimed by the Iron Warriors, became a massive fortress factory where demon engines were forged from a fusion of technology and warp-spawned malevolence. The planet's surface was reshaped into a single, continent-spanning fortification, whose walls incorporated the screaming faces of defeated enemies into their structure. Foundries powered by the torment of enslaved souls produced weapons and armor that combined the Iron Warriors' engineering expertise with demonic intelligence. The World Eaters established gladiatorial worlds where eternal combat provided both entertainment and spiritual sustenance. These planets featured vast arena complexes where captured enemies, rival chaos forces, and even fellow World Eaters fought in battles that could last for subjective centuries. The psychic energy generated by these conflicts fed directly into Khorne's realm, strengthening the Blood God while providing his servants with an endless supply of worthy opponents. The Emperor's children created pleasure worlds that served as both recruitment centers and testing grounds for new forms of excess. These planets featured cities designed according to principles of aesthetic perfection, where every surface and structure was calculated to produce maximum sensory impact. The inhabitants engaged in pursuits that pushed the boundaries of experience beyond anything possible in the material universe, their activities generating the psychic energy that sustained Slaanesh's realm. The demon forges established throughout the Eye represented a fusion of technology and sorcery that would have been impossible in real space. These facilities produced weapons and equipment that incorporated demonic entities as integral components, creating armaments that possessed intelligence, malevolence, and capabilities that defied conventional understanding of physics. The forges themselves were often built around captured or summoned greater demons, whose essence powered the manufacturing processes, while their knowledge guided the creation of increasingly exotic weapons. The process of demon weapon creation required not just technical skill, but also the ability to negotiate with entities whose motivations and desires operated according to alien logic. Each weapon represented a contract between its creators and the demon bound within it, with terms that often included provisions for the weapon to claim its wielder's soul under specific circumstances. The most powerful demon weapons required sacrifices of extraordinary magnitude sometimes consuming entire populations to birth a single blade or bolter. The transformation of the Space Marine legions into scattered warbands occurred gradually over the centuries following their retreat into the Eye. The chaotic nature of time within the region meant that some groups experienced millennia of subjective time while others lived through only years, creating vast disparities in experience and corruption between different factions. The lack of central authority, combined with the corrosive influence of chaos worship, gradually eroded the disciplined structure that had once defined the legions. Individual captains and champions began to assert independence from their primarchs and legion hierarchies, gathering followers around personal banners and pursuing their own agendas. The process was accelerated by the nature of chaos itself, which rewarded individual achievement and ambition while punishing loyalty and selflessness. Warriors who had once served as anonymous members of disciplined formations found themselves compelled to seek personal glory and recognition from their demonic patrons. The fragmentation was not uniform across all legions. The Iron Warriors, with their emphasis on discipline and engineering, managed to maintain more coherent organizational structures than most, though even they experienced significant splintering. The Word Bearers, united by their religious fervor, retained more cohesion than the other legions, but still saw the emergence of competing theological factions that interpreted chaos doctrine in different ways. The most dramatic fragmentation occurred among the Emperor's children, whose pursuit of individual perfection made collective action increasingly difficult. The legion dissolved into hundreds of small warbands, each led by a champion who claimed to have discovered the ultimate expression of their patron's will. These groups often fought each other as readily as they battled imperial forces, their conflicts serving to generate the sensations and experiences that Slaanesh demanded. The internal conflicts between different chaos factions became a defining characteristic of life within the Eye. The competition for resources, favor from the dark gods, and simple survival created an environment where alliances shifted constantly, and betrayal was not just common but expected. The chaos gods themselves encouraged this infighting, viewing it as a form of entertainment and a method for ensuring that only the strongest and most cunning of their servants survived to serve their purposes. The rivalry between Abaddon's Black Legion and the other traitor forces became particularly intense as the former first captain of the Luna Wolves sought to establish himself as the new Warmaster of Chaos. His claims to leadership were disputed by primarchs who saw no reason to subordinate themselves to a mere space marine, regardless of his achievements or the favor he had gained from the dark gods. The resulting conflicts created fault lines within the chaos forces that would persist for millennia. Abaddon's approach to leadership differed significantly from that of Horus. Where the former Warmaster had relied on charisma and brotherhood to unite the legions, Abaddon used a combination of force, cunning, and careful manipulation of chaos politics. He actively recruited warriors from all of the traitor legions, creating a force that transcended the old loyalties while positioning himself as the ultimate expression of chaos unity. The Black Legion's growth came at the expense of the other legions, as Abaddon's recruiters targeted dissatisfied warriors who felt abandoned by their own primarchs or marginalized within their original formations. This practice created additional sources of conflict, as Legion commanders found their best warriors defecting to join the Black Legion's growing ranks. The process was facilitated by the nature of chaos worship itself, which encouraged individuals to seek power and advancement regardless of traditional loyalties. The establishment of permanent strongholds within the Eye of Terror required the traitor legions to master the art of claiming and reshaping worlds that existed according to principles utterly alien to those of real space. These fortress worlds became more than mere military installations. They transformed into living extensions of their occupants' nature, shaped by decades or centuries of exposure to the raw energies of chaos. Each world reflected the particular obsessions and character of its claiming legion, creating a diverse collection of nightmare realms that served as bases for raids into imperial space and laboratories for the development of new forms of corruption. Sikaris stands as perhaps the most significant of these corrupted worlds, serving as the primary stronghold of the Word-Bearers' Legion and a monument to their role as the architects of the galaxy's fall to chaos. The planet's transformation began almost immediately after the Legion's arrival in the Eye, as Lorgar and his Dark Apostles set about reshaping its surface according to their vision of perfect devotion to the Dark Gods. The world that emerged from this process bore no resemblance to its original form, having been rebuilt as a vast shrine world dedicated to chaos undivided. The surface of Sikaris features massive cathedral fortresses that dwarf even the greatest imperial basilicas, their spires reaching into the planet's perpetually storm-racked atmosphere. These structures follow architectural principles that incorporate elements from all four Chaos Gods, creating buildings that somehow maintain structural integrity despite featuring geometries that should be mathematically impossible. The walls are constructed from a black stone that seems to absorb light while simultaneously emanating a faint crimson glow, their surfaces carved with scripture in dozens of languages, including several that predate human civilization. The largest of these cathedral fortresses serves as Lorgar's personal sanctum, a structure so vast that its interior could accommodate entire imperial cities. The building's central nave stretches for kilometers, its vaulted ceiling supported by pillars carved from single blocks of obsidian that reach heights measured in thousands of meters. The floor consists of polished metal plates inscribed with the names of every world that has fallen to chaos since the heresy began, the list growing longer as new conquests are added through arcane rituals that update the inscriptions automatically. Within these cathedral fortresses, the word-bearers conduct their endless devotions to the Dark Gods, their prayers and rituals generating psychic energy that permeates the planet's atmosphere. The air itself carries the weight of accumulated worship, creating an environment where even the most minor religious observances can trigger supernatural phenomena. Candle flames burn with colors that have no names in human languages, while incense smoke forms patterns that spell out prophetic messages in scripts that write themselves across the cathedral walls. The planet's population consists not only of space marines, but also millions of human cultists who serve as both worshippers and sacrificial offerings. These mortals live in sprawling hab complexes built into the foundations of the great cathedrals, their daily lives structured around elaborate schedules of prayer, ritual, and preparation for eventual sacrifice. The most devoted among them undergo surgical modifications that incorporate demonic essence into their flesh, transforming them into living conduits for chaos energy, while maintaining enough of their humanity to serve as effective intermediaries between the word-bearers and their mortal followers. The libraries of Sikaris contain the most complete collection of chaos lore in existence, their archives housing texts that detail every heretical philosophy and forbidden ritual developed since the fall of the Eldar Empire. These repositories are not mere storage facilities, but active research centers where Dark Apostles work to synthesize new forms of corruption by combining elements from different chaos traditions. The books themselves are often bound in human skin or demon hide, their pages inscribed with ink made from the blood of martyrs and heretics alike. The planet of the sorcerers represents Tzeentch's personal gift to the Thousand Suns Legion, a world where the Changer of Ways has allowed his mortal servants to establish a realm that reflects their pursuit of arcane knowledge and mastery over the forces of change. The planet exists in a state of constant flux, its surface reshaping itself according to patterns that mirror the complex schemes and plots that Tzeentch weaves throughout the galaxy. Mountains rise and fall within hours, while seas of liquid crystal form and evaporate according to tides that follow no natural laws. At the planet's heart stands the Tower of the Cyclops, Magnus the Red's personal fortress, and the most architecturally impossible structure within the Eye of Terror. The tower appears to be constructed from crystallized knowledge itself, its walls transparent, yet somehow containing vast libraries and laboratories within their seemingly empty confines. The structure extends infinitely upward, its upper reaches disappearing into dimensions that mortal eyes cannot perceive, while its foundations sink deep into the planet's core, where they tap directly into the raw energies of the warp. The tower's interior defies conventional spatial relationships, featuring chambers that exist in multiple locations simultaneously and corridors that lead to rooms located in entirely different time periods. Magnus has arranged his personal study to overlook every possible future simultaneously, the chamber's windows showing not the planet's surface, but visions of events that may or may not come to pass. The Crimson King spends subjective centuries in this space, analyzing the threads of fate and possibility while working to unravel the schemes that led to his legion's damnation. The libraries within the tower contain not just books, but crystallized thoughts and memories extracted from the minds of scholars throughout the galaxy. These knowledge crystals can be activated by touch, flooding the user's consciousness with information that may take years to fully comprehend. The most dangerous crystals are kept in specially warded vaults, their contents so fundamentally alien or corrupting that exposure to them can transform the reader's mind into something no longer recognizably human. The planet's surface features vast crystal gardens where the Thousand Suns conduct their sorcerous experiments, their rituals causing reality to bend and twist in ways that create permanent alterations to the local space-time. These experimental zones serve as testing grounds for new spells and psychic techniques, their boundaries marked by warning runes that shift position to reflect the current danger level of the experiments being conducted within. The surviving members of the Thousand Suns who have not yet succumbed to the flesh change work tirelessly to find a cure for their condition, their research facilities scattered across the planet's ever-changing surface. These laboratories are staffed by rubric Marines, the dust-filled power armor that contains all that remains of thousands of their battle brothers, their empty helms glowing with eldritch fire as they carry out their former comrades' final commands with mechanical precision. The Plague Planet serves as Nurgle's gift to Mortarion and the Death Guard, a world where the concepts of disease and decay have been elevated to divine status. The planet's transformation reflects the Death Guard's embrace of their patron's philosophy, creating an environment where corruption and putrefaction are not signs of failure, but evidence of natural processes working as intended. The world pulses with organic rhythms that match the heartbeat of the Plague God himself, its surface rising and falling like the chest of some impossibly vast organism. The planet's atmosphere consists of a thick, humid mixture of gases that would be immediately fatal to unprotected humans, but provides perfect conditions for the cultivation of every disease known to the galaxy. The air carries spores and viral particles that can infect not just biological organisms, but mechanical devices and even abstract concepts, creating plagues that attack hope, courage, and other intangible qualities. The Death Guard move through this environment without protection, their corrupted physiology having adapted to thrive in conditions that represent the ultimate expression of biological warfare. Mortarion's fortress occupies the planet's largest continent, a sprawling complex that resembles a combination of military installation and medical research facility. The structure's walls are built from compressed organic matter that continues to decay and regenerate, creating a living fortress that heals damage automatically while constantly evolving to meet new threats. The interior chambers serve as laboratories where the Death Guard conduct experiments in biological warfare, their research aimed at developing new strains of disease that can overcome even the most advanced Imperial medical countermeasures. The planet's surface features vast gardens where diseased plants grow in impossible profusion, their roots extending deep into soil composed entirely of composted organic matter. These botanical laboratories produce fruits and flowers that contain concentrated essences of specific diseases, allowing the Death Guard to harvest biological weapons with the same ease that normal farmers might collect vegetables. The gardens are tended by servitors whose bodies have been extensively modified to incorporate symbiotic organisms that assist in the cultivation process. The waterways that flow across the planet consist of thick, viscous streams that carry dissolved nutrients and bacterial cultures to every corner of the world. These rivers support ecosystems of microorganisms that have evolved beyond conventional biological limitations, some species existing as pure information that can infect data systems and corrupt machine spirits. The Death Guard use these waterways as transportation networks, their vessels designed to navigate the thick fluids while harvesting useful organisms from the water. The population centers scattered across the planet house millions of cultists whose bodies serve as living laboratories for disease research. These mortals exist in states of perpetual sickness that somehow allow them to continue functioning, their immune systems having been deliberately compromised to make them ideal test subjects for new pathogens. The most successful experimental subjects are elevated to positions of authority within the cult hierarchy, their survival proving their worthiness to serve as vessels for Nurgle's gifts. The demon worlds claimed by Khorne throughout the Eye of Terror serve as eternal battlegrounds where Angron and the World Eaters can indulge their hunger for violence without restraint. These planets have been reshaped into perfect arenas for combat, their surfaces featuring terrain designed to facilitate the maximum amount of bloodshed while providing endless opportunities for glorious battle. The worlds pulse with the rhythm of war, their very existence sustained by the psychic energy generated by constant conflict. The largest of these demon worlds features a surface dominated by brass citadels that rise from plains carpeted with the skulls of fallen warriors. These fortresses serve not as defensive positions, but as gladiatorial complexes where the World Eaters engage in ritual combat that has continued uninterrupted for millennia. The Citadel's architecture follows principles designed to amplify the sound of battle, their walls and chambers shaped to create acoustic effects that turn every clash of weapons into a thunderous symphony of war. The arenas within these citadels can accommodate battles involving thousands of participants, their floors stained with the blood of countless champions who have fought and died for Khorne's entertainment. The largest arena features a floor that consists entirely of compressed bone fragments, its surface providing perfect traction for combatants while creating clouds of bone dust that add visual drama to the battles. The walls rise in tiers that can accommodate millions of spectators, though the only audiences these battles ever receive consist of demons and the spirits of dead warriors who watch from the realm of Khorne. Angron himself occupies a throne carved from a single massive skull, positioned at the center of the largest arena where he can observe every battle simultaneously. The Demon Primarch's presence amplifies the rage of every combatant within the Citadel, his psychic emanations turning even minor disagreements into battles to the death. The throne room features walls decorated with weapons taken from every enemy the World Eaters have defeated, the collection growing larger as new trophies are added after each successful raid into Imperial space. The planet's surface between the citadels consists of battlefields where massive formations of World Eaters engage in organized warfare on a scale that dwarfs the greatest conflicts of the material universe. These battles follow no strategic purpose beyond the generation of violence itself, their participants fighting with weapons forged from their own crystallized rage. The combatants include not only space marines, but also the souls of warriors who died in service to Khorne throughout galactic history, their spiritual forms enhanced for eternal combat. The weapons used in these eternal battles are forged in demon foundries that operate continuously, their furnaces fed by the rage and hatred of the combatants themselves. These facilities produce chain axes that grow sharper with each enemy they claim, bolters that fire ammunition forged from the bones of defeated foes, and armor that incorporates the screaming faces of fallen enemies into its design. The foundries are staffed by demon smiths who take personal pride in creating instruments of war that exceed even Khornate standards for brutality and effectiveness. The death of Horus Lupercal aboard his flagship above Terra left a power vacuum within the forces of chaos that threatened to tear apart what remained of the rebellion. As the Traitor Legions fled into the Eye of Terror, their unity shattered along with their dreams of conquest. The question of leadership became paramount to their survival. Among the surviving champions, none possessed a stronger claim to succession than Ezekiel Abaddon, the former first captain of the 16th Legion who had served as Horus's most trusted lieutenant throughout the heresy. Yet claiming that mantle would require more than mere rank or past achievements, it would demand the forging of a new identity that could unite the fractured forces of chaos under a single banner. Abaddon's rise to power began not with grand proclamations or dramatic gestures, but with the methodical elimination of rivals and the careful cultivation of alliances among the scattered warbands that had once comprised the Sons of Horus. The Legion had suffered catastrophic losses during the Siege of Terra, its surviving members demoralized by their Primarch's death and uncertain about their future within the Eye of Terror. Many questioned whether the Legion could survive at all, given the scale of their defeat and the loss of the charismatic leader who had bound them together. The first captain understood that mourning Horus would accomplish nothing beyond ensuring their eventual destruction at the hands of Imperial pursuit forces or rival Chaos factions. Instead, he began the process of transforming the Sons of Horus into something entirely new, a force that would transcend the limitations of Legion loyalty and embrace the full spectrum of Chaos worship. This transformation required not just organizational changes, but a fundamental shift in identity that would allow the Warband to recruit from all of the Traitor Legions, rather than relying solely on their own depleted ranks. The renaming of the Legion to the Black Legion represented more than symbolic gesture. It marked a deliberate rejection of their past failures and an embrace of a darker purpose. The black paint that covered their power armor served as both mourning shroud for their fallen Primarch and declaration of their new allegiance to Chaos undivided rather than any single patron deity. This visual transformation was accompanied by changes in recruitment practices that welcomed warriors from any background, provided they could prove their worthiness through combat and their dedication to the cause of galactic destruction. Abaddon's approach to leadership differed fundamentally from that of his former Primarch. Where Horus had relied on charisma and brotherhood to inspire loyalty, the new Warmaster used a combination of fear, respect, and calculated manipulation to maintain control over his growing forces. He understood that the warriors who flocked to his banner were motivated primarily by personal ambition and the desire for revenge against the Immaterium, emotions that required different handling than the familial bonds that had once united the Luna Wolves. The process of uniting the scattered Chaos forces required Abaddon to demonstrate his superiority over potential rivals through a series of carefully orchestrated conflicts. These battles served multiple purposes, eliminating threats to his authority while providing opportunities to recruit the survivors into his growing warband. The most significant of these conflicts occurred when he challenged the demon Prince Talamin, a former Sons of Horus captain who had claimed leadership over a substantial portion of the Legion's survivors. The duel between Abaddon and Talamin took place on the surface of a demon world within the Eye of Terror, witnessed by thousands of Chaos Space Marines who would either join the victor or face destruction alongside the defeated. The battle raged for hours across terrain that shifted and changed according to the combatants' emotions, their weapons carving furrows in ground that bled actual blood, while the sky above them rained fragments of crystallized hatred. Abaddon's victory was decisive, his power claw tearing through Talamin's demonic flesh, while his bolter reduced the demon prince's followers to scattered atoms. The aftermath of this victory saw hundreds of former Sons of Horus warriors kneel before Abaddon, their submission marking the beginning of the Black Legion's transformation from failed Space Marine chapter to the premier Chaos warband within the Eye of Terror. The new recruits brought with them not just additional fighting strength, but also knowledge of hidden resources and forgotten weapon caches scattered throughout the Eye's twisted geography. The forging of the Talon of Horus represented a pivotal moment in Abaddon's ascension to the position of Warmaster. The weapon, created from the remains of his fallen Primarch's own lightning claw, required extensive modification to accommodate its new wielder, while incorporating demonic essence that would enhance its already formidable capabilities. The process took place within the demon forges of Medrengard, where Iron Warriors artificers worked alongside demon smiths to create an artifact worthy of Chaos's new champion. The Talon's construction required sacrifices on a scale that would have horrified even veteran Space Marines. Entire populations of captured Imperial citizens were fed into the forges, their life essence used to power the arcane machinery, while their screams provided the psychic resonance needed to bind demonic entities into the weapon's structure. The claws themselves were forged from metals that existed only within the Eye of Terror, their edges sharpened with fragments of crystallized hatred harvested from battlefields where millions had died in service to Khorne. The weapon's machine spirit was replaced with a bound demon whose intelligence exceeded that of most mortals, creating a symbiotic relationship between wielder and weapon that enhanced both parties' capabilities. The demon provided tactical advice during combat, while the Talon fed on the life force of enemies it slew, growing stronger with each kill, while sharing that strength with its wielder. The weapon's power field generated energies that could tear through the heaviest armor, while its integrated bolter fired ammunition blessed by all four Chaos Gods. The acquisition of Drachnian, the demon sword known as the End of Empires, marked Abaddon's final transformation from ambitious warlord to chosen champion of chaos undivided. The weapon had been bound within the Imperial Palace during the Siege of Terra, its imprisonment serving as one of the Emperor's final acts before his internment upon the Golden Throne. The demon within the blade had spent millennia plotting its escape, its hatred of the Emperor growing stronger with each passing year of captivity. The retrieval of Drachnian required Abaddon to lead a raid directly into the heart of the Imperial Palace, a mission that many considered impossible given the fortress's defenses and the presence of the Adeptus Custodes. The operation demanded precise timing and coordination between multiple Chaos factions, with diversionary attacks launched across several sectors to draw Imperial attention away from Terra. The Black Legion's assault force infiltrated the palace through ancient maintenance tunnels that had been sealed since the heresy, their progress guided by intelligence provided by Alpha Legion operatives who had remained hidden within the Imperial bureaucracy for millennia. The Demon Sword's liberation required Abaddon to overcome not just physical barriers, but also psychic wards that had been personally crafted by the Emperor himself. The process of breaking these bindings demanded sacrifices of extraordinary magnitude, including several of Abaddon's most trusted lieutenants, whose souls were consumed by the demon's hunger for freedom. The moment when Drachnian finally came free from its prison sent shockwaves through the warp that were felt across the galaxy, alerting every psyker to the fact that one of the most dangerous weapons in existence had fallen into Chaos hands. The Demon Sword's personality proved as challenging to manage as its power was intoxicating to wield. Drachnian possessed intelligence that rivaled that of greater demons, along with an ego that demanded constant acknowledgement of its superiority over mere mortal weapons. The blade whispered constantly to its wielder, offering tactical advice mixed with philosophical observations about the nature of power and the inevitability of imperial collapse. These conversations often lasted for hours, with Abaddon learning to distinguish between the demon's genuine insights and its attempts at manipulation. The weapon's capabilities extended far beyond simple physical damage, encompassing powers that could affect reality itself on a fundamental level. Drachnian could cut through more than flesh and armor. It could sever the bonds between soul and body, slice through dimensional barriers, and even wound abstract concepts like hope or loyalty. The blade's edge existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, allowing it to strike targets that should have been beyond physical reach, while bypassing defenses that relied on conventional understanding of space and time. Abaddon's role as champion of Chaos Undivided required him to maintain a delicate balance between the four major Chaos Gods, drawing power from each while avoiding the trap of becoming too closely associated with any single patron. This approach differed significantly from that of other Chaos champions, who typically devoted themselves entirely to one deity in exchange for specific gifts and abilities. The Warmaster's refusal to choose a single patron initially earned him suspicion from all four gods, each of whom preferred servants who demonstrated absolute loyalty to their particular obsessions. The advantages of serving Chaos Undivided became apparent as Abaddon's power grew beyond what any single god champion could achieve. Khorne provided him with unmatched prowess in personal combat and the ability to inspire berserker fury in his followers, while Tzeentch granted him strategic insight and knowledge of arcane lore that enhanced his tactical planning. Nurgle's gifts manifested as incredible resilience and the ability to survive wounds that would kill ordinary space marines, while Slaanesh enhanced his charisma and provided him with the sensory acuity needed to appreciate the full scope of his achievements. This multifaceted approach to chaos worship required Abaddon to perform rituals and sacrifices that honored all four gods equally, a practice that demanded extensive knowledge of chaos theology and careful attention to the symbolic significance of every action. His personal chambers within the Black Legion's flagship featured shrines to each deity, their positioning and decoration calculated to maintain perfect balance while avoiding any appearance of favoritism. The rituals performed in these spaces often lasted for days, their complexity reflecting the difficulty of satisfying four different sets of divine expectations simultaneously. The establishment of Abaddon's power base within the Eye of Terror required more than just military conquest. It demanded the creation of a political and economic network that could support the Black Legion's growing ambitions. The War Master understood that successful campaigns against the Immaterium would require resources on a scale that no single warband could provide, necessitating alliances with other chaos factions and the development of manufacturing capabilities that could produce the weapons and equipment needed for large-scale warfare. The planet of Sorshirius became one of Abaddon's most important strongholds, its demon forges producing weapons and armor for the Black Legion, while its libraries provided access to arcane knowledge that enhanced the warband's tactical capabilities. The world's population of enslaved mortals served multiple purposes, providing both labor for the manufacturing facilities and raw material for the sacrificial rituals that powered the demon forges. The planet's governors, drawn from the ranks of former imperial officials who had embraced chaos worship, administered these operations with bureaucratic efficiency that would have impressed their former colleagues. The recruitment network established by the Black Legion extended throughout the Eye of Terror and beyond, drawing warriors from every Traitor Legion and numerous renegade chapters that had fallen to chaos corruption. This diversity of backgrounds created a warband whose tactical flexibility exceeded that of more homogeneous forces, as former Imperial Fists brought expertise in defensive warfare, while ex-Raven Guard contributed stealth and infiltration skills. The integration of these different fighting styles required extensive retraining and the development of new tactical doctrines that could accommodate various approaches to warfare. Abaddon's long-term strategy centered on the concept of gradual erosion rather than single decisive campaigns, recognizing that the Imperium's vast size and resources made it impossible to defeat through conventional military action alone. The Black Crusades that would eventually bear his name were conceived as multi-pronged assaults designed to weaken Imperial defenses while gathering the resources needed for increasingly ambitious operations. Each crusade served as both military campaign and recruitment drive, attracting new followers while testing the loyalty and capabilities of existing forces. The first stirrings of this grand strategy became apparent as Abaddon began coordinating activities between different chaos factions, using his growing influence to prevent internecine conflicts that wasted resources while encouraging cooperation on projects that advanced their common goals. The War Master's ability to negotiate between rival demon princes and feuding warbands demonstrated political skills that complemented his prowess in personal combat, establishing him as a leader capable of thinking beyond immediate tactical concerns. The development of spy networks within Imperial space provided Abaddon with intelligence that proved crucial to the success of his operations. These networks, staffed by cultists who had infiltrated Imperial institutions at every level, provided detailed information about fleet movements, defensive preparations, and internal political conflicts that could be exploited during future campaigns. The most valuable agents occupied positions within the Adeptus Mechanicus and Imperial Navy, their access to technical specifications and operational plans, allowing the Black Legion to anticipate and counter Imperial tactical innovations. The consolidation of Abaddon's power within the Eye of Terror marked only the beginning of his grand design for the galaxy's destruction. The Warmaster understood that the forces of chaos could not remain indefinitely within their twisted sanctuary, feeding on past glories, while the Imperium grew stronger beyond the eye's borders. The establishment of fortress worlds and the forging of alliances between rival warbands had created the foundation for something far more ambitious, a series of massive military campaigns that would test the Imperium's defenses while gathering the resources and artifacts necessary for an eventual assault on Terra itself. The First Black Crusade erupted from the Eye of Terror in the 31st millennium like a plague unleashed upon the galaxy, its timing calculated to exploit the chaos and confusion that still gripped the Imperium in the aftermath of the heresy. Imperial forces were scattered across thousands of worlds, struggling to rebuild their shattered fleets while purging chaos corruption from systems that had fallen during Horus's rebellion. The Adeptus Astartes had been divided into smaller chapters according to the Codex Astartes, their reduced numbers making it impossible to respond quickly to threats on the scale that Abaddon was preparing to unleash. The Cadian Gate represented the most obvious target for any force seeking to emerge from the Eye of Terror in strength. This narrow corridor of stable space served as the primary route between the Eye and the wider galaxy, its strategic importance recognized by both Imperial and Chaos forces. The Imperium had fortified this passage with a network of fortress worlds whose defensive installations were designed to channel any Chaos incursion into killing zones where superior Imperial firepower could be brought to bear. The most important of these worlds was Cadia itself, a planet that had been transformed into a military fortress whose entire population existed solely to support its defensive mission. Abaddon's approach to the Cadian Gate differed from the straightforward assault that Imperial commanders had prepared to repel. Rather than launching a direct attack against the most heavily fortified positions, the Black Legion struck at the outer fortress worlds that formed the defensive network's foundation. These worlds possessed formidable defenses, but lacked the depth of fortification that made Cadia itself virtually impregnable. The strategy required precise coordination between multiple Chaos fleets, their attacks timed to prevent Imperial reinforcements from reaching the targeted worlds before their defenses could be overwhelmed. The assault on Belize Corona demonstrated the tactical sophistication that Abaddon had developed during his years within the Eye of Terror. The fortress world's orbital defenses consisted of weapon platforms that could destroy entire fleets, their targeting systems linked to ground-based control centers that coordinated the defensive fire. The Black Legion's initial approach appeared to follow conventional assault doctrine, with battle barges advancing in formation toward the planet's defensive perimeter. Imperial gunners opened fire at maximum range, their weapons tracking the approaching vessels with mechanical precision. The true nature of Abaddon's plan became apparent when the leading Black Legion vessels suddenly changed course, their movements revealing that the entire formation had been a deception designed to mask the real assault force. Chaos Strike cruisers equipped with experimental cloaking devices materialized within the orbital defense grid, their weapons targeting the control centers that coordinated the platform network. The simultaneous destruction of multiple command nodes created gaps in the defensive fire that allowed the main assault force to close with the planet's surface defenses. The ground campaign that followed showcased the Black Legion's evolution from a single Space Marine chapter into a diverse force capable of multiple forms of warfare. Former Iron Warriors specialists breached the fortress walls with siege techniques that incorporated demonic engineering, while ex-Alpha Legion operatives infiltrated command bunkers to sabotage communication networks from within. World Eater's assault troops carved through defensive positions with chain-axe charges that left no survivors, their berserker fury amplified by the presence of cornate demons summoned through battlefield rituals. The fall of Belize Corona sent shockwaves throughout the Imperial High Command, demonstrating that the Chaos forces had evolved far beyond the disorganized warbands that had fled into the Eye of Terror centuries earlier. The planet's destruction eliminated a crucial link in the Cadian Gate's defensive chain while providing Abaddon with vast quantities of military equipment and thousands of potential recruits from the fortress world's garrison. More importantly, the victory established the War Master's reputation as a strategic threat capable of planning and executing complex operations against heavily defended Imperial positions. The subsequent assaults on Vigilatum and Mordax followed similar patterns, with Chaos forces exploiting weaknesses in Imperial defensive doctrine while demonstrating tactical innovations that caught their opponents off guard. The Siege of Vigilatum featured the first recorded use of demon engines on a large scale, as Iron Warriors war machines possessed by warp entities proved capable of operating in environments that would destroy conventional vehicles. These hybrid constructs combine the durability of Imperial engineering with the malevolent intelligence of demonic entities, creating weapons platforms that could adapt their tactics in real time while regenerating damage through supernatural means. The defense of Mordax collapsed when Black Legion infiltrators succeeded in corrupting the planet's machine spirits, turning the fortress world's own defensive systems against their operators. The corruption spread through the planet's communication networks like a virus, transforming servitors into homicidal maniacs while causing weapon platforms to target Imperial positions instead of Chaos forces. The speed of the collapse suggested that the infiltration had been planned for decades, with sleeper agents gradually working their way into positions where they could cause maximum damage when activated. The success of these initial assaults created a domino effect throughout the Cadian Gate's defensive network, as Imperial commanders struggled to respond to threats that seemed to appear simultaneously across multiple star systems. The Chaos forces demonstrated an ability to coordinate their operations across vast distances, suggesting the existence of communication methods that Imperial intelligence had not detected. The revelation that Abaddon commanded spy networks capable of penetrating fortress worlds that had been considered impregnable forced a complete reassessment of Imperial security protocols. The strategic objectives behind the First Black Crusade extended far beyond simple territorial conquest or the satisfaction of destroying Imperial worlds. Each target had been selected for specific reasons related to Abaddon's long-term plans for galactic domination. The fortress worlds contained weapon stockpiles and manufacturing facilities that could support future Chaos operations, while their populations provided both recruits and sacrificial victims for the rituals that sustained demon engines and other warp-spawned war machines. The capture of Imperial naval facilities proved particularly valuable, as Chaos forces gained access to shipyards capable of constructing and maintaining the massive fleets required for large-scale campaigns. The technical specifications seized from these installations allowed Chaos artificers to develop countermeasures for Imperial weapons and defensive systems, while captured personnel provided intelligence about fleet movements and strategic planning. The most valuable prizes were the astropathic relay stations that formed the backbone of Imperial communication networks, their destruction creating information blackouts that hampered Imperial coordination, while their capture provided Chaos forces with access to encrypted Imperial transmissions. The First Black Crusade's conclusion came not through decisive battle, but through Abaddon's recognition that his forces had achieved their primary objectives. The Chaos fleets withdrew into the Eye of Terror before Imperial reinforcements could arrive in sufficient strength to threaten their retreat, carrying with them the spoils of victory and thousands of new recruits drawn from the conquered worlds. The campaign had demonstrated that the Eye of Terror was no longer a prison for defeated rebels, but a launching point for renewed assaults against Imperial civilization. The intervening centuries between the First and subsequent Black Crusades were not periods of inactivity, but times of preparation and consolidation. Abaddon used these intervals to integrate new recruits into his forces, while developing the weapons and tactics that would be employed in future campaigns. The demon forges within the Eye of Terror worked continuously to produce the equipment needed for increasingly ambitious operations, their output enhanced by the technical knowledge gained from captured Imperial facilities. The recruitment drives that followed each Black Crusade transformed the composition of Chaos forces within the Eye of Terror. The success of Abaddon's campaigns attracted warriors from throughout the galaxy, including renegade Space Marine chapters that had turned from the Emperor's Light and Imperial Guard regiments whose loyalty had been corrupted by exposure to Chaos influence. These new additions brought fresh tactical perspectives and knowledge of current Imperial military doctrine, information that proved invaluable in planning future operations. The development of new Demon engine designs represented one of the most significant innovations to emerge from these preparation periods. The fusion of Imperial technology with demonic essence created war machines whose capabilities exceeded anything in the standard Imperial arsenal, their supernatural properties allowing them to operate in environments where conventional vehicles would fail. The most successful designs incorporated multiple demon types, creating hybrid entities whose combined abilities made them virtually unstoppable on conventional battlefields. The Gothic War, later designated as the 12th Black Crusade, demonstrated the full maturation of Abaddon's strategic vision and the devastating effectiveness of Chaos forces that had spent millennia preparing for renewed conflict with the Immaterium. The campaign's scope dwarfed previous Black Crusades, encompassing multiple sectors and involving fleet actions on a scale not seen since the Horus Heresy itself. The Gothic sector's strategic importance lay not just in its industrial capacity, but in its position along major warp routes that connected the Eye of Terror to the galaxy's core regions. The opening phases of the Gothic War revealed the extent to which Chaos intelligence networks had penetrated Imperial institutions. Simultaneous uprisings erupted across dozens of worlds as sleeper cells activated according to predetermined signals, their coordinated actions creating chaos that prevented effective Imperial response to the main Chaos assault. The rebels possessed detailed knowledge of Imperial defensive plans and communication protocols, suggesting that the infiltration had been ongoing for centuries under the direction of Alpha Legion operatives working in conjunction with local Chaos cults. The naval battles that characterized the Gothic War showcased new Chaos ship designs that incorporated lessons learned from previous campaigns. These vessels featured armor configurations that could deflect Imperial lance strikes while mounting weapon systems that fired ammunition blessed by the Dark Gods. The most feared of these innovations were the Planet Killer-class battleships, massive vessels whose primary weapons could crack the crust of inhabited worlds and render them uninhabitable within hours. The Planet Killer's first recorded use against the world of Savaven demonstrated the weapon's horrific effectiveness and Abaddon's willingness to employ strategies that transcended conventional military objectives. The planet's population of 12 billion Imperial citizens died within minutes as the vessel's primary weapon tore through the world's crust, triggering volcanic eruptions that consumed entire continents. The destruction served no tactical purpose beyond demonstrating Chaos's capacity for absolute annihilation, its psychological impact on Imperial morale proving as valuable as any military victory. The Imperial response to the Gothic War revealed both the strengths and weaknesses of the post-heresy military structure. The smaller Space Marine chapters could respond more quickly to emerging threats than the old legions, but their reduced numbers made it impossible to concentrate sufficient force to match the scale of Abaddon's assault. The Imperial Navy's fleet assets were scattered across multiple sectors, their commanders lacking the authority to coordinate large-scale operations without approval from distant bureaucratic hierarchies. The emergence of Lord Admiral Spire as the primary Imperial commander in the Gothic sector marked a turning point in the campaign, as his tactical innovations began to counter some of Chaos's advantages. Spire's use of coordinated fleet actions and his willingness to accept heavy casualties in exchange for strategic objectives demonstrated that Imperial forces could adapt to new forms of warfare when led by commanders who understood the true nature of the Chaos threat. The Blackstone fortresses discovered during the Gothic War represented artifacts of such immense power that their control became the campaign's primary objective for both sides. These ancient space stations, constructed by unknown aliens in the distant past, possessed weapons capable of destroying entire fleets, while their defenses could withstand bombardment that would reduce planets to rubble. The fortress's origins remained mysterious, but their strategic value was immediately apparent to both Imperial and Chaos commanders. Abaddon's capture of two Blackstone fortresses fundamentally altered the balance of power within the Gothic sector, providing Chaos forces with mobile weapons platforms whose firepower exceeded that of entire Imperial battle fleets. The fortress's alien technology proved compatible with Chaos modifications, their weapon systems enhanced through demonic possession, while their defenses were strengthened with warp-spawned armor that could regenerate damage automatically. The climactic battle of the Gothic War occurred when Imperial forces attempted to prevent Abaddon from escaping the sector with his captured prizes. The engagement involved hundreds of vessels from both sides, their battle lines stretching across light years of space as they maneuvered for tactical advantage. The Blackstone fortresses proved their worth as weapons of war, their primary guns carving through Imperial formations, while their secondary batteries eliminated smaller vessels with surgical precision. The war's conclusion saw Abaddon withdraw into the Eye of Terror with his objectives achieved, the captured Blackstone fortresses providing him with weapons that would prove crucial in future campaigns. The Gothic sector lay in ruins, its industrial capacity destroyed, and its population decimated by years of warfare. The campaign had demonstrated that Chaos forces could now challenge the Imperium on equal terms, their technological and tactical capabilities having evolved to match or exceed those of their enemies. The 13th Black Crusade represented the culmination of Abaddon's millennia-long preparation for renewed war against the Imperium, its scale and ambition dwarfing all previous Chaos campaigns. The target was Cadia itself, the fortress world that had stood as the primary barrier between the Eye of Terror and the wider galaxy for 10,000 years. The planet's destruction would open the Cadian Gate permanently, allowing Chaos forces unlimited access to Imperial space while eliminating the strategic choke point that had contained their expansion for millennia. The preliminary phases of the 13th Black Crusade began decades before the main assault, as Chaos infiltrators worked to weaken Cadia's defenses from within while external forces eliminated the supporting installations that formed the planet's defensive network. The campaign's opening moves demonstrated the sophisticated intelligence apparatus that Abaddon had developed, with coordinated strikes against targets whose selection revealed detailed knowledge of Imperial strategic planning. The Siege of Cadia itself proved to be the most brutal and prolonged battle of the 41st millennium, as Imperial defenders fought with desperate courage against Chaos forces that seemed to possess unlimited numbers and resources. The planet's fortress cities became scenes of urban warfare that continued for months, their streets running with blood as space marines from both sides engaged in close combat that left entire districts in ruins. The final assault on Cadia's primary fortress employed the full range of weapons and tactics that Abaddon had developed over the course of 13 Black Crusades. Demon engines carved through defensive positions, while possessed titans dueled with their loyalist counterparts across battlefields that spanned continents. The Blackstone fortresses captured during the Gothic War provided orbital fire support that could penetrate even Cadia's most heavily armored bunkers, their alien weapons proving capable of destroying fortifications that had withstood 10 millennia of siege. The planet's ultimate destruction came not through conventional military action, but through the activation of ancient pylons that had regulated the flow of warp energy through the Cadian system since before human civilization. The pylons' destruction created a cascade failure that tore reality apart, transforming Cadia into a demon world while opening a permanent rift in space-time that connected the Eye of Terror directly to the galaxy beyond. The great rift that emerged from Cadia's destruction split the galaxy in half, its chaotic energies creating warp storms that made travel and communication impossible across vast regions of Imperial space. The Imperium found itself divided into two separate regions, each cut off from the other and forced to operate independently while facing Chaos incursions that could emerge anywhere along the rift's length. The destruction of Cadia during the 13th Black Crusade marked the end of an era that had defined Imperial strategy for 10 millennia, but the fortress world's significance extended far beyond its final moments of defiance. The Cadian system had served as the Imperium's primary bulwark against chaos incursions since the immediate aftermath of the Horus Heresy, its strategic position making it the most crucial choke point in the galaxy's ongoing war against the forces of darkness. To understand the magnitude of what was lost when Cadia fell, one must examine the careful construction of the defensive network that transformed a single star system into humanity's greatest fortress. The Cadian Gate represented the only stable route out of the Eye of Terror that could accommodate large-scale military operations, while smaller chaos forces could navigate the treacherous warp currents that surrounded the Eye's borders. Any fleet attempting to carry invasion forces numbering in the millions required the relatively calm space that existed within the Cadian system. This geographical reality had been recognized by Imperial strategists within decades of the Traitor Legions' retreat into the Eye, leading to the systematic militarization of every world within the system's boundaries. The transformation of Cadia itself from an ordinary Imperial world into the galaxy's most formidable fortress began during the 32nd millennium, as waves of colonists and military engineers arrived to begin construction projects that would continue for thousands of years. The planet's surface geography proved ideally suited for defensive purposes, featuring mountain ranges that could accommodate massive weapon emplacements and river valleys that channeled potential attackers into predetermined killing zones. The polar regions were converted into vast underground complexes that housed command centers and manufacturing facilities, their locations chosen to maximize protection from orbital bombardment while maintaining communication links with surface installations. The fortress cities that dominated Cadia's landscape represented the pinnacle of Imperial military architecture, their designs incorporating lessons learned from every major siege in human history. Kasr Dirth, the largest of these installations, sprawled across an area equivalent to a small continent, its walls rising hundreds of meters above the surrounding terrain while extending equally far below ground level. The city's defensive perimeter consisted of multiple layers of fortification, each designed to channel attackers into overlapping fields of fire while providing defenders with covered routes for repositioning and resupply. The outer walls of Kasr Dirth incorporated void shield generators, whose protective fields could deflect orbital bombardment while allowing defensive fire to pass through unimpeded. These shields drew power from geothermal taps that extended deep into the planet's core, ensuring that the defensive systems could operate indefinitely without external energy sources. The wall-mounted weapon batteries included macro cannons capable of engaging targets in low orbit, their targeting systems linked to orbital sensor platforms that provided early warning of approaching threats. Behind the outer defenses lay a maze of secondary fortifications that transformed the city's interior into a three-dimensional battlefield where every building served a military purpose. Residential blocks featured firing positions cut into their walls, while commercial districts contained hidden weapon caches and communication nodes that allowed defenders to coordinate their actions even if primary command centers were destroyed. The city's transportation network consisted of underground tunnels that could move troops and supplies without exposing them to enemy fire, their routes designed to confuse attackers while providing defenders with intimate knowledge of every passage and junction. The civilian population of Cadia existed solely to support the planet's military mission, their daily lives structured around the requirements of maintaining the fortress world's defensive capabilities. Children began military training before they could properly walk, their education focusing on weapons handling, tactical doctrine, and the maintenance of military equipment. The phrase, "the planet broke before the guard," became more than a motto. It represented a fundamental truth about Cadian society, where every citizen understood that their world's survival depended on their willingness to fight and die in its defense. The Cadian shock troopers emerged from this militarized society as the Imperium's most renowned Imperial Guard regiment, their reputation for discipline and effectiveness earning them deployment to battlefields throughout the galaxy. The regiment's training regimen began in childhood and continued throughout their military careers, creating soldiers whose tactical knowledge and combat skills exceeded those of many Space Marine chapters. Cadian officers were prized throughout the Imperial Guard for their ability to maintain unit cohesion under the most extreme circumstances, their leadership style combining rigid discipline with tactical flexibility that allowed rapid adaptation to changing battlefield conditions. The distinctive purple eyes that marked native-born Cadians resulted from generations of exposure to the unique radiation patterns that emanated from the Eye of Terror. This physical characteristic became a mark of pride among the regiment's members, distinguishing them from troops raised on other worlds while serving as a constant reminder of their homeworld's proximity to the galaxy's greatest source of chaos corruption. The radiation exposure also enhanced their resistance to psychic attacks and demonic influence, making Cadian troops particularly effective against chaos forces that relied on fear and corruption to weaken their enemies. Cadian military doctrine emphasized combined arms tactics that integrated infantry, armor, and artillery into cohesive fighting formations capable of engaging multiple enemy types simultaneously. The regiment's standard battle companies included Leman Russ battle tanks, whose crews trained alongside the infantry squads they supported, creating tactical partnerships that could respond to threats with minimal communication delays. Artillery batteries practiced rapid deployment techniques that allowed them to provide fire support within minutes of arriving at new positions, their gun crews capable of maintaining accurate fire even while under direct enemy assault. The training facilities scattered across Cadia's surface-replicated battlefield conditions from every major conflict in Imperial history, allowing troops to practice tactics against simulated orc hordes, Tyrannid swarms, and chaos Space Marine assaults. The most challenging exercises took place in environments that mimicked the twisted geography of demon worlds, where normal tactical doctrine proved inadequate and soldiers had to adapt to conditions that defied conventional military logic. These training scenarios prepared Cadian troops for deployment to battlefields where reality itself could become a weapon in enemy hands. The network of fortress worlds that supported Cadia's primary defensive mission extended throughout the system and into neighboring sectors, creating a defensive zone that could absorb multiple simultaneous attacks while maintaining the integrity of the overall strategic position. Vigilatum served as the system's primary naval base, its orbital shipyards producing the escort vessels and system defense monitors that patrolled the space lanes leading to Cadia. The world's surface featured massive communication arrays that coordinated fleet movements across multiple star systems, their signals encrypted using techniques developed by the Adeptus Mechanicus specifically for anti-chaos operations. Mordax functioned as the system's intelligence center, its facilities housing the analysts and interrogators who processed information gathered from throughout the Eye of Terror's border regions. The planet's underground complexes contained detention facilities where captured chaos cultists underwent interrogation using techniques that balanced the need for information with the risk of corruption from exposure to heretical knowledge. The intelligence gathered at Mordax informed tactical planning throughout the Cadian Gate, providing commanders with advance warning of chaos fleet movements and strategic intentions. Belize Corona served as the system's primary manufacturing center, its factory complexes producing the ammunition, spare parts, and replacement equipment that sustained the defensive network's operations. The world's industrial capacity rivaled that of Forge Worlds, its production lines operating continuously to meet the enormous logistical requirements of maintaining fortress installations across multiple star systems. The planet's workforce included millions of indentured servants whose families had served the Imperium for generations. Their specialized knowledge of military manufacturing techniques passed down through bloodlines that trace their origins to the earliest days of the Fortress Network's construction. The space-based components of the Cadian Gate's defenses included orbital weapon platforms whose firepower exceeded that of Imperial Navy battleships. These installations featured lance batteries capable of destroying capital ships with single volleys, their targeting systems linked to sensor networks that could track approaching vessels from the edge of the star system. The The platform's defensive systems included void shields and point defense turrets that could engage fighter craft and boarding torpedoes, while their living quarters housed the crews and tech priests responsible for maintaining the complex weapon systems. The naval patrols that monitored the approaches to Cadia operated according to protocols developed through centuries of engagement with Chaos forces. Patrol squadrons included vessels from multiple Imperial Navy battle fleets, their crews trained specifically for anti-Chaos operations, and equipped with weapons blessed by the Ecclesiarchy to enhance their effectiveness against demonic entities. The patrol routes covered every possible approach vector to the Cadian system, their overlapping coverage areas ensuring that no Chaos force could reach the fortress worlds without detection. The communication networks that linked the various components of the Cadian Gate represented one of the most sophisticated information systems in Imperial space. Astropathic relay stations provided real-time communication between distant installations, their psychic choirs protected by specialized Geller field generators that prevented Chaos interference with transmitted messages. Backup communication systems included conventional radio networks and courier vessels that could maintain contact even if psychic communication became impossible due to warp storm activity. The logistical infrastructure required to sustain the Cadian Gate's operations involved supply lines that stretched across dozens of star systems. Transport fleets carried ammunition, food, fuel, and replacement personnel to installations throughout the defensive network, their routes protected by escort squadrons and monitored by intelligence services that watched for signs of Chaos infiltration. The supply depots scattered throughout the region contained stockpiles sufficient to sustain combat operations for years without resupply, their locations chosen to remain accessible even if primary supply routes were severed by enemy action. The recruitment and training systems that provided personnel for the Cadian Gate drew candidates from throughout the Segmentum Solar, their selection criteria emphasizing psychological stability and resistance to Chaos corruption. Training facilities on dozens of worlds prepared recruits for service in the Fortress network, their curricula including specialized courses on demon recognition, psychic defense, and the maintenance of equipment exposed to warp radiation. The most promising candidates received advanced training on Cadia itself, where they learned to operate within the unique environment created by proximity to the Eye of Terror. The defensive doctrine that governed Cadian Gate operations assumed that any major Chaos assault would involve forces that exceeded conventional military capabilities. Standard tactical manuals included procedures for engaging demon engines, possessed vehicles, and enemy units that could ignore normal physical laws. Artillery crews trained with blessed ammunition designed to disrupt demonic manifestations, while infantry squads practiced combat techniques that accounted for enemies who could regenerate from wounds that would kill normal opponents. The psychological warfare aspects of defending the Cadian Gate required specialized training and equipment designed to maintain morale in the face of enemies who used fear and corruption as primary weapons. Commissars assigned to Cadian units underwent additional training in recognizing signs of Chaos corruption, their authority extending to summary execution of personnel who showed evidence of heretical influence. Chaplains and priests maintained constant vigilance against the subtle forms of corruption that could spread through military units exposed to prolonged Chaos influence. The technological innovations developed specifically for the Cadian Gate's defense included weapon systems and detection equipment designed to counter Chaos tactics and capabilities. Auspex arrays incorporated blessed components that could detect demonic presence even when supernatural concealment was employed, while communication systems featured encryption techniques that prevented Chaos sorcerers from intercepting or corrupting transmitted messages. Vehicle armor included sanctified elements that provided additional protection against demon weapons, while infantry equipment featured religious iconography that served both ceremonial and practical purposes in combat against Chaos forces. The Imperial response to the Eye of Terror's malevolent presence required the development of specialized military organizations and defensive strategies unlike anything previously conceived in human warfare. The conventional forces that had conquered the galaxy during the Great Crusade proved inadequate when faced with enemies that could manipulate reality itself, summon demons from the warp, and corrupt loyal servants through mere proximity to their blasphemous presence. The Imperium's adaptation to this new form of warfare demanded the creation of institutions specifically designed to combat supernatural threats while maintaining the secrecy necessary to prevent widespread panic among the general population. The Ordo Malleus emerged from the broader Inquisition as the primary imperial organization responsible for combating demonic incursions and chaos corruption. Founded in the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, when the full extent of chaos influence became apparent to imperial leadership, the Ordo Malleus developed expertise in identifying, tracking, and eliminating threats that operated according to principles beyond conventional military understanding. The organization's inquisitors underwent training that combined traditional investigative techniques with arcane knowledge of demonic hierarchies, chaos rituals, and the subtle signs of warp corruption that could manifest in seemingly loyal imperial citizens. The inquisitors of the Ordo Malleus operated with authority that exceeded that of planetary governors and sector commanders, their mandate to combat chaos corruption taking precedence over all other imperial concerns. This extraordinary power proved necessary when dealing with threats that could spread through normal command structures, turning loyal officers into unwitting agents of the dark gods while maintaining the appearance of continued loyalty to the Emperor. The Inquisitors' ability to requisition entire Imperial Guard regiments, commandeer naval vessels, and even demand the cooperation of Space Marine chapters reflected the Imperium's recognition that chaos corruption represented an existential threat to human civilization. The methods employed by the Ordo Malleus often proved as destructive as the threats they sought to eliminate. Entire planetary populations faced exterminatus orders when chaos corruption reached levels that made conventional purification impossible, their deaths justified by the need to prevent the spread of heretical influence to neighboring systems. Industrial worlds that had produced tainted equipment faced complete sterilization of their manufacturing facilities, while military units that had been exposed to demonic influence underwent purges that sometimes eliminated entire regiments to ensure that no trace of corruption survived. The Grey Knights represented the ultimate expression of imperial dedication to combating the demonic threat, their creation marking one of the most closely guarded secrets in imperial history. Founded by the Emperor himself during the final days of the Horus Heresy, this chapter of Space Marines underwent genetic and psychic modifications that made them uniquely suited for warfare against entities from the warp. Unlike other Space Marine chapters, every Grey Knight possessed psychic abilities that had been carefully cultivated and trained to resist chaos corruption, while providing them with weapons that could harm demons in ways that conventional armaments could not. The recruitment process for the Grey Knights differed fundamentally from that of other Space Marine chapters. Candidates were selected not just for physical prowess and mental resilience, but for psychic potential that could be developed into specific abilities useful against demonic opponents. The selection criteria were so stringent that entire worlds might be screened to find a single suitable candidate, their populations subjected to tests that identified individuals with the rare combination of psychic talent and incorruptible character necessary for induction into the chapter. The training regimen undergone by Grey Knights aspirants lasted decades and included exposure to controlled demonic manifestations that would drive ordinary humans insane. These exercises taught the recruits to recognize different types of demons, understand their weaknesses, and develop the mental disciplines necessary to resist corruption attempts that could subvert even the strongest-willed individuals. The training facilities on Titan, the Grey Knights' fortress monastery, incorporated chambers where the barriers between real space and the warp had been deliberately weakened, creating environments where aspirants could practice their abilities under conditions that approximated actual combat against demonic forces. The weapons and equipment used by the Grey Knights incorporated blessed materials and arcane technologies that made them effective against supernatural opponents. Their force weapons channeled psychic energy through specially treated metals that could disrupt demonic manifestations, while their power armor included protective wards that provided additional resistance to chaos corruption. The chapter's vehicles and aircraft featured similar modifications, their machine spirits blessed by the most senior tech priests and protected by religious iconography that served both ceremonial and practical purposes in combat against entities that could possess mechanical systems. The Grey Knights' tactical doctrine emphasized rapid deployment and decisive action against demonic incursions, recognizing that prolonged exposure to chaos influence could corrupt even their specially trained warriors. Strike forces typically consisted of small, elite units that could be deployed anywhere in the galaxy within hours of receiving reports of demonic activity. Their operations followed protocols that prioritized the elimination of greater demons and other high-value targets whose destruction could disrupt entire chaos invasions, even if this meant accepting higher casualties than conventional military doctrine would recommend. The secrecy surrounding Grey Knights' operations extended to the systematic elimination of witnesses who observed their activities. Imperial Guard regiments that fought alongside Grey Knights faced memory modification or execution to prevent knowledge of the chapter's existence from spreading throughout the Imperial military. This policy, while seemingly harsh, reflected the understanding that widespread knowledge of demons and chaos corruption could itself become a vector for heretical influence, as curious individuals might seek forbidden knowledge that would ultimately lead to their damnation. The establishment of the Cadian Gate as the Imperium's primary defensive barrier against chaos incursions required military preparations on a scale that dwarfed most Imperial campaigns. The fortification of Cadia and its surrounding systems consumed resources equivalent to those needed for entire Crusade fleets, while the permanent garrison stationed there represented one of the largest concentrations of Imperial military power outside the solar system itself. The defensive network that emerged from these preparations incorporated lessons learned from every major engagement with chaos forces since the Horus Heresy, creating a multi-layered system designed to contain threats that conventional military doctrine could not adequately address. The massive military buildup required to contain the chaos threat involved the permanent deployment of dozens of Imperial Guard regiments, multiple Space Marine chapters, and substantial Imperial Navy assets to the Cadian Gate region. These forces underwent specialized training that prepared them for combat against enemies who could ignore normal physical laws, regenerate from wounds that would kill ordinary opponents, and corrupt loyal soldiers through psychological warfare techniques that exploited fundamental human fears and desires. The training programs developed for these units became templates that were eventually adopted throughout the Imperial military for forces that might encounter chaos opposition. The logistical infrastructure required to support this massive military presence involved supply lines that stretched across multiple sectors, their routes protected by escort fleets and monitored by intelligence services that watched for signs of chaos infiltration. The ammunition requirements alone necessitated the construction of specialized manufacturing facilities that could produce blessed rounds, sanctified explosives, and other weapons designed specifically for anti-demon warfare. These facilities operated under security protocols that exceeded those used for the most sensitive Imperial projects, their workers subjected to regular screening for signs of corruption, while their products underwent blessing rituals that involved senior members of the ecclesiarchy. The command structure that governed Cadian Gate operations integrated representatives from multiple Imperial organizations, creating a unified hierarchy that could coordinate responses to threats that might require expertise from different specialties. Ordo Malleus Inquisitors worked alongside Imperial Guard generals and Space Marine captains, their combined knowledge allowing for tactical planning that accounted for both conventional military factors and the supernatural capabilities of chaos forces. This integration required the development of new communication protocols and operational procedures that balanced the need for security with the requirements of effective military coordination. Lord Castellan Ursarkar Creed emerged as one of the most significant Imperial commanders in the defense of the Cadian Gate, his tactical innovations and leadership abilities earning him recognition throughout the Imperial military hierarchy. Creed's approach to warfare emphasized flexibility and adaptation, recognizing that combat against Chaos forces often required abandoning conventional tactical doctrine in favor of improvised solutions that could counter supernatural threats. His ability to coordinate complex operations involving multiple Imperial organizations made him uniquely suited for command positions, where success depended on integrating diverse military assets into cohesive fighting forces. Creed's tactical genius manifested most clearly in his development of defensive strategies that could channel Chaos assaults into predetermined killing zones while maintaining the flexibility needed to respond to unexpected enemy capabilities. His defensive plans incorporated multiple fallback positions and alternative command structures that could maintain operational effectiveness, even if primary installations were compromised by demonic influence or direct assault. The tactical manuals he developed became standard references throughout the Imperial Guard, their emphasis on adaptability and combined arms coordination proving effective against a wide range of enemy types. The Lord Castellan's leadership during multiple Black Crusades demonstrated his ability to maintain unit cohesion and morale under circumstances that would break lesser commanders. His presence on the battlefield inspired ordinary soldiers to extraordinary acts of courage, while his tactical acumen allowed Imperial forces to achieve victories against opponents who possessed significant advantages in raw military power. Creed's understanding of Chaos tactics and capabilities, gained through decades of combat experience, made him one of the few Imperial commanders who could anticipate enemy actions and develop countermeasures before Chaos forces could exploit their supernatural advantages. Saint Celestine represented a different but equally important aspect of Imperial resistance to Chaos corruption, her manifestation demonstrating that the Emperor's power could still intervene directly in mortal affairs when the need was greatest. The Living Saint's appearances on battlefields throughout the Eye of Terror's border regions provided Imperial forces with a supernatural ally whose abilities could match those of demon princes and other high-ranking Chaos entities. Her presence served both tactical and morale purposes, as her miraculous abilities could turn the tide of battles, while her very existence proved to Imperial soldiers that their faith in the Emperor was not misplaced. The phenomena surrounding Saint Celestine's manifestations defied conventional understanding, as she appeared to possess the ability to resurrect herself after suffering wounds that should have been immediately fatal. Her weapons and armor blazed with holy light that could banish demons and heal wounded Imperial soldiers, while her flight capabilities allowed her to engage enemies across three-dimensional battlefields in ways that conventional infantry could not match. The tactical advantages provided by her presence extended beyond her personal combat abilities, as her inspirational effect on nearby Imperial forces often resulted in combat performance that exceeded normal human limitations. The Ecclesiarchy's response to Saint Celestine's manifestations involved extensive theological study aimed at understanding the mechanisms behind her miraculous abilities. The Church's scholars developed doctrines that explained her powers as direct manifestations of the Emperor's will, while their investigations into her background and origins provided insights into the conditions that might allow similar manifestations to occur elsewhere. These studies led to the development of new religious practices and battlefield rituals designed to invoke the Emperor's protection against Chaos corruption, though none proved capable of replicating the full scope of Saint Celestine's abilities. The role of the Imperial Navy in maintaining the blockade around the Eye of Terror required the permanent deployment of entire battle fleets to patrol duties that could last for decades without relief. These fleets operated according to protocols that assumed any vessel emerging from the Eye of Terror was potentially hostile, their rules of engagement authorizing the use of deadly force against ships that failed to respond to identification challenges or exhibited signs of chaos corruption. The naval forces assigned to blockade duties underwent specialized training that prepared them for combat against enemies who might employ demon engines, possessed vehicles, or supernatural abilities that could compromise ship systems. The blockade fleets included vessels from multiple battle fleet commands, their combined strength representing one of the largest concentrations of Imperial naval power in the galaxy. The fleet compositions emphasized long-range firepower and defensive capabilities, as engagement doctrine called for destroying Chaos vessels before they could close to boarding range, where their corrupted crews might pose contamination risks to Imperial personnel. The ship's weapon systems included specialized ammunition designed for use against demon engines and other supernatural targets, while their defensive systems incorporated blessed components that provided additional protection against chaos sorcery. The patrol routes followed by blockade vessels covered every possible exit vector from the Eye of Terror, their overlapping coverage areas ensuring that no chaos fleet could escape detection regardless of the route they chose to follow. The patrol schedules rotated ships through different sectors on regular cycles, preventing chaos intelligence from predicting Imperial fleet positions, while ensuring that all areas received adequate surveillance coverage. Communication protocols between patrol vessels included code phrases and verification procedures designed to detect chaos infiltration attempts, while backup communication systems provided redundancy in case primary networks were compromised by enemy action. The intelligence-gathering operations conducted by blockade fleets provided Imperial commanders with advance warning of Chaos fleet movements and strategic intentions. Long-range sensor arrays monitored warp disturbances that might indicate the approach of enemy vessels, while specialized listening posts intercepted Chaos communications and analyzed them for tactical intelligence. The information gathered through these operations informed strategic planning throughout the Cadian Gate region, allowing defensive forces to prepare for specific types of threats while maintaining readiness for unexpected enemy capabilities. The maintenance and resupply requirements for the blockade fleets necessitated the construction of specialized naval facilities throughout the Eye of Terror's border regions. These installations included shipyards capable of performing major repairs on battle-damaged vessels, ammunition depots that could resupply entire fleets, and personnel facilities that provided rest and recuperation for crews who had spent months or years on patrol duty. The security protocols governing these facilities exceeded those used for most Imperial installations, as their compromise by Chaos forces could potentially provide enemies with detailed intelligence about Imperial naval capabilities and operational procedures. The psychological challenges faced by personnel assigned to blockade duties required specialized support services and rotation policies designed to prevent the gradual corruption that could result from prolonged exposure to the Eye of Terror's malevolent influence. Medical facilities throughout the blockade zone included personnel trained to recognize the early signs of chaos corruption, while chaplains and commissars maintained constant vigilance against heretical influence among ship crews. The rotation schedules for blockade assignments limited individual tour of duty to prevent excessive exposure to warp radiation and psychological stress, while debriefing procedures identified personnel who might require additional screening or treatment before reassignment to other duties. The destruction of Cadia's pylons during the 13th Black Crusade triggered a catastrophic chain reaction that fundamentally altered the galaxy's structure in ways that even the most prescient Imperial strategists had never anticipated. The ancient Xenos technology that had regulated warp energies throughout the Cadian system for millions of years suddenly ceased to function, their protective fields collapsing in a cascade failure that sent shockwaves through the fabric of reality itself. The Eye of Terror, no longer constrained by the pylon's stabilizing influence, began expanding at an exponential rate that consumed entire star systems within hours of the initial breach. The expansion did not follow conventional patterns of spatial growth, but instead manifested as a tearing of reality that propagated along the galaxy's natural warp currents and psychic ley lines. These invisible channels of energy, which had always existed beneath the surface of real space like underground rivers, suddenly became conduits for raw chaos energy that erupted into the material universe with devastating effect. Star systems that had never experienced significant warp phenomena found themselves engulfed by reality storms that transformed their planets into demon worlds, while their populations either died screaming or underwent mutations that rendered them no longer recognizably human. The birth of the Great Rift, designated by imperial scholars as the Cicatrix Maledictum, represented the largest single alteration to galactic geography since the formation of the Eye of Terror itself. This massive wound in reality stretched from the ruins of Cadia across the galaxy's width, its chaotic energies carving a path through the Imperium's heartland before terminating in the Hadron expanse on the galaxy's eastern fringe. The rift's dimensions defied conventional measurement, as its boundaries fluctuated according to warp tides and the activities of the Chaos Gods, but at its widest points, it encompassed regions that would have taken Imperial vessels decades to traverse under normal circumstances. The immediate effects of the Great Rift's formation included the complete disruption of warp travel throughout vast regions of Imperial space. The chaotic energies that poured through the dimensional breach created navigation hazards that made conventional faster-than-light travel impossible, as ships attempting to enter the warp found themselves either destroyed by the raw psychic energy or transported to locations that bore no relationship to their intended destinations. Entire Imperial Navy battle fleets disappeared without trace when their navigators attempted to plot courses through regions affected by the rift's influence, their vessels presumably lost in the howling chaos of the Immaterium. The phenomenon known as the Noctis Aeterna, or blackness eternal, manifested as a galaxy-wide disruption of astropathic communication that left Imperial worlds isolated from central authority for the first time since the Age of Strife. The psychic storms generated by the Great Rift's formation overwhelmed astropathic relay stations throughout the galaxy, their delicate psychic apparatus either destroyed by the sheer intensity of warp energy or corrupted by demonic influence that transformed their operators into conduits for chaos entities. The carefully maintained communication networks that had allowed the Imperium to function as a unified entity suddenly ceased to operate, leaving planetary governors and sector commanders without guidance from Terra or knowledge of events beyond their immediate vicinity. The loss of astropathic communication created administrative chaos throughout the Imperium, as local authorities found themselves forced to make decisions without reference to higher authority or knowledge of the broader strategic situation. Tithe fleets that had operated according to schedules maintained for millennia suddenly found their destinations unreachable, while military reinforcements dispatched to combat zones arrived to find either empty space or demon worlds where Imperial planets had once existed. The bureaucratic systems that had governed the Imperium's vast territories broke down as information flows ceased, creating power vacuums that were quickly filled by ambitious governors, rogue military commanders, and chaos cults that had previously operated in secret. The disruption of interstellar travel and communication effectively divided the Imperium into two separate regions, each cut off from the other and forced to operate independently. The region that remained connected to Terra, designated as Imperium Sanctus by Imperial cartographers, retained access to the Astronomicon and could maintain some semblance of coordinated governance, though even these areas experienced significant disruption from the psychic storms that emanated from the Great Rift. The territories on the far side of the rift, known as Imperium Nihilus or the Dark Imperium, found themselves completely isolated from Terra's guidance and forced to survive using only their local resources and military assets. The emergence of new warp storms throughout the galaxy accompanied the Great Rift's formation as the dimensional barriers that had maintained reality's stability for millions of years suddenly weakened across vast regions of space. These storms manifested as localized tears in reality, that allowed demonic entities to pour through into the material universe without the need for complex summoning rituals or psychic conduits. Worlds that had never experienced significant chaos activity found themselves facing demon incursions that could manifest anywhere on their surfaces, their defenders unprepared for enemies that could ignore conventional physical laws while wielding weapons that could wound souls as well as bodies. The new warp storms displayed characteristics that differed significantly from the stable anomalies that had existed prior to the Great Rift's formation. These phenomena appeared and disappeared according to patterns that defied Imperial attempts at prediction, their boundaries shifting constantly as they fed on the psychic emanations generated by the fear and despair of nearby populations. Some storms lasted only hours before dissipating, leaving behind landscapes that had been fundamentally altered by exposure to raw warp energy, while others persisted for months or years, creating permanent gateways through which chaos forces could launch repeated invasions. The demon incursions that accompanied these new warp storms overwhelmed planetary defense forces that had been trained primarily for combat against conventional enemies. Imperial Guard regiments found their standard tactics ineffective against opponents who could regenerate from wounds that should have been immediately fatal, while their weapons proved inadequate against entities that existed partially outside normal space-time. The psychological impact of facing supernatural enemies proved as devastating as their physical capabilities, as entire military units broke and fled when confronted with horrors that their training had never prepared them to encounter. The manifestation of greater demons on worlds throughout the galaxy marked a significant escalation in the scale of chaos incursions, as these powerful entities could maintain their presence in real space for extended periods without the need for continuous psychic sustenance from mortal worshippers. Bloodthirsters carved paths of destruction across continents, while great unclean ones transformed entire ecosystems into plague gardens that spawned diseases capable of infecting mechanical systems as well as biological organisms. Lords of Change manipulated local politics and military hierarchies from within, their schemes unfolding across decades, while Keepers of Secrets established pleasure cults that corrupted planetary elites through promises of experiences that transcended mortal limitations. The response to these incursions varied dramatically depending on local resources and the competence of planetary leadership. Worlds with strong military traditions and experienced commanders managed to organize effective resistance against demonic invasions, their forces adapting quickly to the supernatural nature of their enemies, while maintaining the discipline necessary for prolonged campaigns against opponents who used fear and corruption as primary weapons. These successful defenses often relied on the presence of Space Marine chapters or other elite Imperial forces whose training and equipment made them capable of engaging demon armies on relatively equal terms. Less fortunate worlds succumbed to chaos corruption within days or weeks of the initial demon manifestations, their populations either slaughtered outright or transformed into cultists who welcomed their supernatural conquerors as divine liberators. The speed of these collapses often surprised Imperial observers who had expected planetary defense forces to maintain resistance for months or years, but the psychological impact of facing enemies who could manipulate reality itself proved too overwhelming for military units that lacked specialized training in anti-demon warfare. The industrial worlds that formed the backbone of the Imperium's manufacturing capacity faced particular challenges as demon incursions targeted their production facilities and technical personnel. The corruption of machine spirits by demonic influence transformed automated production lines into sources of tainted equipment, while the possession of tech priests and other technical specialists disrupted the maintenance procedures that kept Imperial technology functioning. Forge worlds that had operated for millennia without significant interruption suddenly found their output reduced to a fraction of normal levels as their workforce fled or fell victim to demonic influence. The agricultural worlds that supplied food to the Imperium's urban populations experienced ecological disasters as demon incursions introduced supernatural plagues and mutations that affected both crops and livestock. Entire planetary ecosystems collapsed as Nurgle's influence spread through soil and water systems, creating famines that affected multiple star systems when food shipments ceased to arrive at their destinations. The breakdown of agricultural production created refugee crises as populations fled from affected worlds, their movements spreading both conventional diseases and chaos corruption to previously unaffected regions. The hive worlds that housed billions of Imperial citizens became focal points for demon incursions, as their massive populations provided the psychic energy needed to sustain large-scale demonic manifestations. The dense urban environments of hive cities created ideal conditions for the spread of chaos cults, while their complex infrastructure networks allowed demon armies to move through underground passages and maintenance tunnels that bypassed conventional defensive positions. The fall of major hive worlds to chaos corruption eliminated entire planetary populations, while providing demon armies with staging areas for attacks on neighboring systems. The shrine worlds that served as centers of imperial faith faced targeted attacks from demon armies that sought to corrupt or destroy the religious sites that anchored the Emperor's influence throughout the galaxy. The desecration of major cathedrals and pilgrimage sites created psychic shockwaves that weakened imperial morale across entire sectors, while the corruption of religious artifacts and relics provided chaos forces with weapons that could be used against the faithful. The loss of these spiritual centers disrupted the religious practices that helped imperial citizens resist chaos corruption, creating psychological vulnerabilities that demon armies exploited through propaganda and terror campaigns. The fortress worlds that guarded strategic locations throughout the Imperium found their defensive preparations inadequate against enemies who could manifest directly within their perimeters through localized warp rifts. Military installations that had been designed to repel conventional invasions proved vulnerable to demon armies that could bypass walls and fortifications by emerging from tiers in reality that opened within command centers and ammunition depots. The supernatural abilities of demon armies allowed them to neutralize defensive advantages that had been carefully planned and constructed over centuries of military engineering. The space-based installations that controlled shipping lanes and communication networks throughout the galaxy faced similar challenges as demon incursions manifested aboard orbital platforms and space stations. The confined environments of these facilities created ideal conditions for the spread of demonic corruption, while their critical functions made them high-priority targets for chaos forces seeking to disrupt Imperial coordination and logistics. The loss of orbital facilities often left entire star systems isolated and defenseless, as their ability to communicate with other Imperial territories or request military assistance disappeared along with their space-based infrastructure. The Adeptus Mechanicus worlds that maintained the Imperium's technological knowledge faced unique challenges, as demon incursions targeted their data storage facilities and research installations. The corruption of sacred SDCs and technical databases threatened to eliminate technological knowledge that had been preserved since the dark age of technology, while the possession of senior tech priests disrupted the training programs that produced new generations of technical specialists. The loss of technical knowledge created cascading failures throughout Imperial infrastructure, as maintenance procedures were forgotten and manufacturing techniques disappeared along with the personnel who had preserved them. The recruitment worlds that supplied personnel for the Imperial Guard and other military organizations found their populations decimated by demon incursions that specifically targeted young adults suitable for military service. The loss of these recruitment pools created personnel shortages throughout the Imperial military at precisely the moment when increased manpower was needed to combat the expanding chaos threat. The disruption of recruitment and training programs meant that military units suffering casualties in combat against demon armies could not be replaced or reinforced, leading to a gradual degradation of Imperial military capability throughout affected regions. The naval bases and shipyards that maintained the Imperial Navy's fleet strength faced attacks from demon armies that sought to eliminate the Imperium's ability to project power across interstellar distances. The corruption of shipyard facilities and the destruction of orbital construction platforms reduced the Imperial Navy's ability to replace vessels lost in combat while disrupting the maintenance schedules that kept existing ships operational. The loss of naval capability created a vicious cycle, as reduced fleet strength made it impossible to provide adequate protection for remaining naval facilities, leading to further losses and continued degradation of Imperial space power. The effects of the Great Rift extended beyond immediate military threats to encompass fundamental changes in the nature of reality throughout the affected regions. The laws of physics became unreliable in areas close to major warp storms, creating environments where conventional technology failed to function, while psychic phenomena manifested with unprecedented frequency and intensity. These reality distortions affected everything from basic chemistry to complex mechanical systems, forcing Imperial forces to adapt their tactics and equipment to function in conditions that defied conventional scientific understanding. The reality distortions created by the Great Rift fundamentally transformed the strategic landscape of the 42nd millennium, forcing the Imperium to confront challenges that exceeded even the darkest predictions of its most pessimistic strategists. The Eye of Terror's expansion had not merely created a larger warp storm, but had fundamentally altered the galaxy's structure, creating conditions where Chaos forces could operate with unprecedented freedom, while Imperial responses remained hampered by communication breakdowns and logistical failures that showed no signs of improvement. The expanded influence of the Eye of Terror manifested most clearly in the phenomenon of reality bleeding, where the chaotic energies of the Immaterium seeped into normal space-time across vast regions that had previously remained stable for millennia. Worlds that had never experienced significant psychic phenomena suddenly found their populations manifesting spontaneous mutations, while their planetary governors reported equipment failures that defied conventional explanation as machine spirits became corrupted by exposure to warp energies. The boundaries between the material universe and the realm of chaos had become permeable across distances measured in thousands of light years, creating an environment where demon manifestations could occur without the complex rituals and psychic conduits that had previously been necessary. The strategic implications of this expanded chaos influence became apparent as Imperial forces discovered that traditional containment strategies no longer functioned effectively against threats that could manifest anywhere within the affected regions. The fortress worlds and defensive networks that had successfully channeled chaos incursions into predetermined killing zones found themselves bypassed entirely, as demon armies materialized directly within their perimeters through localized reality tiers that opened without warning. Military commanders who had spent decades studying chaos tactics found their expertise rendered obsolete by enemies who no longer needed to follow predictable invasion routes or rely on conventional logistics to sustain their operations. The emergence of Roboute Guilliman from his millennia-long stasis represented the most significant development in Imperial leadership since the Emperor's internment upon the Golden Throne. The Primarch's resurrection, accomplished through a combination of Eldar sorcery and ancient Imperial technology, provided the Imperium with a leader whose strategic vision and administrative capabilities had been proven during the Great Crusade's most successful campaigns. Guilliman's return coincided with the galaxy's darkest hour, his awakening occurring just as the Great Rift's formation threatened to tear apart the Imperium's remaining unity and leave humanity defenseless against the expanding chaos threat. The Lord Commander's assessment of the Imperium's current state revealed the extent to which 10 millennia of bureaucratic stagnation and religious dogma had weakened the empire he had helped to build. The efficient administrative systems he had established during the heresy's aftermath had calcified into rigid hierarchies that prioritized procedure over results, while the rational approach to governance that had characterized the early Imperium had been replaced by superstitious practices that often hindered rather than helped effective decision-making. Guilliman's efforts to reform these systems faced resistance from entrenched interests that viewed any change as potential heresy, creating internal conflicts that diverted resources from the urgent task of combating the Chaos expansion. The Indomitus Crusade launched by Guilliman represented the largest imperial military operation since the Great Crusade itself, its scope encompassing multiple simultaneous campaigns across both sides of the Great Rift. The Crusade's primary objectives included re-establishing contact with isolated imperial territories, reinforcing worlds that remained under imperial control, and launching counterattacks against Chaos forces that had expanded their influence during the period of imperial disarray. The scale of these operations required coordination between military assets that had not worked together since the Horus Heresy, as Space Marine chapters, Imperial Guard regiments, and Adeptus Mechanicus forces combined their capabilities under unified command structures. The Primaris Space Marines developed by Archmagos Belisarius Call provided the Indomitus Crusade with enhanced capabilities that proved crucial in combat against the strengthened Chaos forces that had emerged from the Eye of Terror's expansion. These genetically improved warriors possessed physical capabilities that exceeded those of traditional Space Marines, while their equipment incorporated technological advances that had been developed in secret during the 10 millennia since the heresy. The deployment of Primaris Marines to chapters throughout the galaxy created logistical challenges as existing forces adapted to new tactical doctrines, while integrating enhanced warriors whose capabilities required different approaches to battlefield deployment. The establishment of new fortress worlds along the Great Rift's borders became a primary focus of Imperial reconstruction efforts, as traditional defensive strategies required adaptation to counter threats that could manifest through dimensional rifts rather than conventional invasion routes. These installations incorporated lessons learned from the fall of Cadia, their designs emphasizing redundant command structures and distributed defensive systems that could continue operating even if primary facilities were compromised by demon incursions. The construction of these fortresses consumed resources on a scale that strained the Imperium's already overtaxed manufacturing capacity, while their garrison requirements competed with other military operations for personnel and equipment. The Vigilus campaign demonstrated both the potential and limitations of Imperial responses to the post-Rift strategic environment. The Hive world's position near the Nachmund Gauntlet, one of the few stable passages through the Great Rift, made it a crucial strategic objective for both Imperial and Chaos forces seeking to control movement between the galaxy's divided halves. The massive military buildup that occurred on Vigilus attracted attention from multiple Chaos warbands, orc invasions, and other threats that converged on the world simultaneously, creating a multi-sided conflict that tested Imperial coordination capabilities under the most challenging circumstances. The defense of Vigilus required the deployment of multiple Space Marine chapters, dozens of Imperial Guard regiments, and substantial Adeptus Mechanicus forces, their combined strength representing one of the largest Imperial military concentrations since the Indomitus Crusade's launch. The campaign's complexity increased as different enemy factions pursued conflicting objectives, while Imperial forces struggled to maintain unity of command among diverse military organizations with different tactical doctrines and operational priorities. The presence of Abaddon's Black Legion forces elevated the conflict's significance beyond mere territorial control, as the War Master's personal involvement suggested that Chaos forces viewed Vigilus as a stepping stone toward larger strategic objectives. The ongoing threat posed by Chaos forces operating from within the expanded Eye of Terror manifested through a new generation of Black Crusades that incorporated lessons learned from previous campaigns while exploiting the strategic advantages created by the Great Rift's formation. These operations no longer required the massive logistical preparations that had characterized earlier Black Crusades, as Chaos forces could now launch attacks from multiple directions simultaneously while maintaining supply lines through dimensional rifts that bypassed Imperial defensive networks entirely. The unpredictability of these new assault patterns forced Imperial commanders to maintain defensive preparations across vast frontages, dispersing their forces in ways that prevented the concentration of strength needed for decisive counterattacks. The evolution of chaos tactics reflected the expanded capabilities available to forces operating from demon worlds, where the normal constraints of physics and logistics no longer applied. Abaddon's forces demonstrated the ability to deploy demon engines and other supernatural war machines in quantities that would have been impossible to sustain through conventional manufacturing, while their recruitment efforts drew upon populations of corrupted mortals, whose numbers seemed to increase rather than diminish despite continuous combat losses. The psychological warfare capabilities of these enhanced chaos forces proved particularly effective against Imperial defenders, who had been trained primarily for combat against conventional enemies. The emergence of new demon princes from among the ranks of Chaos Space Marines created additional command capabilities that allowed for more sophisticated strategic planning and battlefield coordination. These ascended champions possessed intelligence and tactical acumen that exceeded those of lesser demons, while maintaining enough connection to their mortal origins to understand Imperial military doctrine and exploit its weaknesses effectively. The presence of multiple demon princes within Chaos force structures created redundant leadership hierarchies that could maintain operational effectiveness even when primary commanders were eliminated, making it increasingly difficult for Imperial forces to disrupt enemy operations through targeted assassinations or decapitation strikes. The corruption of Imperial worlds through subtler means than direct military invasion represented another evolution in chaos strategy that proved particularly difficult for Imperial forces to counter. Chaos cults that had previously operated in secret found their activities facilitated by the psychic disturbances created by the Great Rift's presence, their recruitment efforts enhanced by the fear and desperation that gripped populations throughout the affected regions. These cults could prepare worlds for eventual chaos conquest through sabotage, assassination, and the gradual corruption of local leadership, creating internal threats that diverted Imperial resources from external defensive preparations. The prophetic implications of the Great Rift's formation and the Eye of Terror's continued expansion suggested that the galaxy faced an existential crisis whose resolution would determine the future of human civilization. Imperial scholars who studied the phenomenon's progression patterns identified trends that indicated accelerating expansion rates, with new warp storms appearing at increasing frequencies, while existing anomalies grew larger and more stable over time. The mathematical models developed by these researchers suggested that current expansion rates could eventually result in the complete merger of realspace and the Immaterium throughout vast regions of the galaxy. The theological implications of these developments created doctrinal challenges for the Imperial Creed as religious authorities struggled to explain how the Emperor's protection could allow such widespread chaos expansion to occur. Some factions within the ecclesiarchy interpreted the crisis as a test of faith that would ultimately strengthen the Imperium through adversity, while others viewed it as evidence that humanity's sins had finally provoked divine judgment that could only be appeased through increased devotion and sacrifice. These theological debates influenced imperial policy at every level, as religious considerations often took precedence over purely military or administrative concerns in decision-making processes. The potential for complete galactic consumption by chaos forces represented the ultimate nightmare scenario that drove imperial strategic planning throughout the Dark Millennium. The precedent established by the Eye of Terror's original formation demonstrated that sufficiently powerful psychic trauma could permanently alter the fabric of reality across interstellar distances, while the Great Rift's creation proved that such alterations could propagate throughout the galaxy under the right conditions. The possibility that future catastrophes might trigger cascading failures that consumed all of real space motivated extreme measures in imperial defensive planning, including contingency protocols for the evacuation of Terra itself if chaos expansion reached the solar system. The development of new technologies and tactics specifically designed to combat reality distortions became a priority for Imperial research institutions, though progress remained limited by the fundamental incompatibility between rational scientific methods and the chaotic nature of warp phenomena. The most promising research focused on the ancient pylon technology that had originally contained the Eye of Terror, with Adeptus Mechanicus expeditions dispatched to investigate similar Xenos artifacts throughout the galaxy. These investigations faced enormous risks, as the research sites often lay within or near chaos-controlled territories, while the alien nature of the technology made it difficult to understand or replicate using Imperial manufacturing techniques. The long-term survival of human civilization increasingly depended on the Imperium's ability to adapt its institutions and strategies to function effectively in a galaxy where chaos influence had become a permanent feature of the strategic environment. The rigid hierarchies and bureaucratic procedures that had maintained Imperial unity during periods of relative stability proved inadequate for responding to threats that could manifest anywhere without warning, while requiring rapid decision-making and tactical flexibility. The reforms initiated by Guilliman represented the beginning of this adaptation process, but their ultimate success remained uncertain as entrenched interests continued to resist changes that threatened their traditional sources of power and influence. The role of the Space Marines as humanity's primary defenders against chaos corruption took on increased importance as conventional Imperial Guard forces proved inadequate for sustained combat against supernatural enemies. The expansion of Space Marine recruitment and the deployment of Primaris reinforcements throughout the galaxy represented attempts to address this capability gap, but the scale of the chaos threat exceeded what even enhanced Space Marine forces could realistically contain. The development of new tactical doctrines that could effectively integrate Space Marine capabilities with other Imperial military assets became crucial for maximizing the effectiveness of limited elite forces against overwhelming enemy numbers. The future of the galaxy hung in the balance as the forces of order and chaos prepared for conflicts that would determine whether human civilization could survive in a universe where the barriers between reality and nightmare had been permanently weakened. The Eye of Terror stood as both the source of humanity's greatest threat and a constant reminder of the price of corruption, its malevolent presence serving as a warning that the eternal war between order and chaos would continue until one side achieved final victory. The outcome of this cosmic struggle remained uncertain, but the stakes could not be higher. The survival of humanity itself depended on the Imperium's ability to contain the darkness that threatened to consume everything in its path. The Dark Millennium had begun, and with it came the realization that the galaxy's future would be shaped by humanity's response to challenges that exceeded anything faced during the previous 10,000 years of Imperial history. The Eye of Terror's expansion marked not just a military crisis, but a fundamental transformation of the universe itself, creating conditions where the very nature of reality had become a battlefield upon which the fate of all sentient life would ultimately be decided.